When the confetti falls and the final whistle echoes through the stadium, a strange silence takes hold. For a brief moment, the roar of the Super Bowl fades, and America exhales. The scoreline is set, the heroes are crowned. And yet, when the dust settles, what lingers in the national memory is not always the game. It is the 30-second bursts of storytelling that play between the tackles. In living rooms across the country, people rise from couches not to cheer a touchdown, but to marvel at an ad. Each February, the nation stops. Not for football, but for the theater of commerce disguised as culture. It is a ritual, unlike any other. A single night when emotion, humor, nostalgia, and spectacle collide in perfect symmetry. The Super Bowl ad is no longer a commercial break. It is the moment millions wait for, the pulse of the American imagination. Apple's 1984 did not sell a computer. It promised rebellion. Coca-Cola's Mean Joe Greene did not sell a beverage. It offered redemption. Budweiser's Clydesdales did not sell beer. They sold Americana itself. These fragments of moving images became national myths, preserved in memory long after the scoreboard was forgotten. For most of the world, a championship game is an ending. For America, it is an exhibition, a mirror of what the country values, desires, and believes about itself. Somewhere along the way, the Super Bowl ceased to be just a contest of athletes. It became a contest of messages, where emotion was currency and attention was the prize. The field became a stage, and the breaks between plays became the real performance. When did that happen? When did the commercials become the main event? When did the game become the intermission? The answer lies not in a single ad or era, but in a long cultural evolution that blurred the line between sport and spectacle, between memory and marketing. In the beginning, commercials were functional. They interrupted the game. They funded the broadcast, and they filled time. But slowly, they began to tell stories. They began to feel cinematic. They began to make people feel something deep enough to talk about the next morning. Advertising has always chased emotion, but the Super Bowl gave it a cathedral. With every passing decade, brands learned to outplay the sport itself. They hired filmmakers instead of ad men, composers instead of jingle writers, and psychologists instead of sales managers. They built narratives around laughter, tears, and unity, harnessing the same dramatic rhythm that once belonged only to the game. The Super Bowl ad became a new kind of myth-making, where every second had to justify its millions and every frame had to matter. The result is a paradox. The biggest night in American sports became the biggest night in advertising. Fans who could not name the winning team from a decade ago can still recall the moment a child whispered thanks. Mean Joe, or when a silhouetted hammer shattered Big Brother's screen in 1984. Those 30 seconds lasted longer than any touchdown run, longer than any halftime show, longer even than the careers of many who played the game. The memory of those ads transcended football. They became cultural touchstones, shaping how generations saw themselves and their country. To understand this transformation, one must understand America's relationship with performance. The Super Bowl was never just a sporting event. From its inception, it was designed as a national pageant, a celebration of progress, power, and unity. It combined the two most American passions, competition and consumption. Over time, the ads stopped being interruptions and became the main attraction. They reflected our humor, our fears, our nostalgia, and our longing to belong to something bigger. They became an emotional scoreboard, measuring not who won the game, but who won the nation's heart. The most powerful commercials told stories that felt timeless. They borrowed the language of cinema, the pacing of music videos, and the emotional punch of drama. Apple told us to think different. Coca-Cola told us to share. Budweiser told us that friendship and loyalty mattered most. In a country where attention is the ultimate commodity, these moments became sacred. For one night, America gathers not to watch athletes, but to feel something together. In a fractured culture, the Super Bowl ad remains one of the last shared experiences, a secular sermon broadcast to millions of believers. But behind the beauty lies something darker. Every frame is engineered. Every emotion is calculated. The laughter, the nostalgia, the tears, none of it happens by accident. The Super Bowl is the grand illusion where corporations play puppeteers of feeling, weaving identity and loyalty through subconscious cues. A flicker of childhood memory here, a note of patriotic music there, and the audience is moved not to think, but to feel. The line between genuine sentiment and strategic manipulation dissolves entirely. There is power in that manipulation. Each ad competes not for dollars, but for dominance over cultural memory. The companies that win the Super Bowl ad war do not just sell products. They own moments in time. They create new icons that outlive the athletes on the field. In its glow, the purity of the sport dimmed, replaced by the choreography of persuasion. Yet there is beauty in the contradiction. These ads are art in their own way. They speak to collective dreams and fears with precision few novels or films achieve. They connect a divided country, if only for seconds. They reflect both the genius and the cost of American creativity. To watch a Super Bowl ad is to glimpse the national psyche at its most vulnerable, its most hopeful, and its most commercial. Year after year, the ritual repeats. Families gather around screens, not just for the kickoff, but for the anticipation of that next commercial. Who will make us laugh? Who will make us cry? Who will define the year ahead in 30 unforgettable seconds? The stakes are cultural immortality, and the price of entry grows higher with every broadcast. It is easy to forget that beneath it all lies a football game. Two teams fighting for glory, coaches battling for legacy, players pushing through pain most will never see. Yet even in their triumph, their stories often fade faster than the brands flashing across screens. Somewhere between the fourth quarter and the next day's headlines, the ads win. They become the moments replayed, analyzed, and remembered. The irony is profound. The Super Bowl was created to crown a champion, but it evolved into something larger reflection of what America values most. It is no longer just a battle for victory on the field, but a showcase of who can own the nation's attention. The field may host the game, but the real theater unfolds in the spaces between the plays. And so, as the stadium lights dim and the echoes of celebration fade, one truth remains. The Super Bowl has become the most expensive storytelling platform in human history. It is where culture, commerce, and emotion meet in perfect harmony and perfect illusion. The ads are no longer supporting acts. They are the headliners. The game, for all its intensity and glory, has become the backdrop to a much bigger performance. The crowd may cheer for touchdowns, but the world remembers the commercials. That is the paradox at the heart of modern sport and modern America. The scoreboard fades, but the stories endure. The question is no longer who wins the game, but who wins our memory. In the beginning, the Super Bowl was just another game. There were no extravagant halftime shows, no global broadcasts, no marketing frenzy. When the Green Bay Packers faced the Kansas City Chiefs in 1967, two networks aired it simultaneously because no one was certain how many people would actually care. The tickets did not sell out. The commercials were local, modest, and mostly forgettable. At that time, the NFL was still fighting for its place in the American consciousness. It could not have known that this single event would evolve into a cultural cathedral where advertising, entertainment, and identity would merge into a single spectacle. The early years of the Super Bowl reflected the innocence of a simpler era in broadcasting. The commercials were extensions of local television habits, made to fill time between plays. Companies spent modest amounts, often less than $40,000, to reach an audience that was growing but far from united. The ads sold beer, cars, and razors. They sold comfort and belonging. But they were not yet art. The game was the story. The commercials were background noise. That changed when television became more than a medium. It became a mirror. During the 1970s, America transformed. The country was recovering from Vietnam, facing political scandal, and trying to find new ways to define optimism. Television offered connection at a time of fragmentation, and the Super Bowl became the annual moment of unity. Brands saw an opening. They realized that the broadcast was not merely a sporting event, it was a national ritual with guaranteed attention. As television technology improved, so did the art of persuasion. Commercials were no longer static messages. It became miniature performances. The camera, the music, and the pacing began to mimic cinema. Advertising agencies started to compete for emotional power rather than airtime. The Super Bowl became their stage, and the audience became their congregation. The fusion of corporate power and cultural psychology began quietly. In the 1980s, when consumerism reigned supreme, the advertising world recognized that emotion could sell more than logic ever could. This was the decade that saw the birth of the blockbuster commercial. In 1984, Apple introduced a computer by creating a revolution. The company's ad was cinematic, cryptic, and bold. It appeared only once during the Super Bowl, but it changed everything. It was not about a product. It was about a feeling. It told viewers they could be part of something larger. The ad cost more than many small films of its time, and it became the defining moment that turned the Super Bowl into a global advertising battleground. The success of that single ad revealed the future. The Super Bowl would never again be a game alone. It would become a cultural event built around the anticipation of commercial storytelling. Brands realized that 30 seconds during this broadcast could generate headlines, discussions, and emotional resonance that lasted for years. The commercials stopped being filler. They became the spectacle itself. By the 1990s, this transformation was complete. The price for a single slot had risen into the millions, and advertisers began treating the Super Bowl like the Oscars of marketing. Each year, companies spent months crafting their messages, hiring Hollywood directors, composers, and actors. The goal was no longer to sell a product, but to own a moment. The language of advertising changed entirely. It became cinematic, emotional, and often deeply personal. Television networks and the NFL understood this symbiosis. The game and the ads became inseparable. The networks could charge higher fees because viewers no longer left their seats during commercial breaks. For one night, people wanted to watch the ads as much as they wanted to watch the game. That was unprecedented in the history of broadcasting. Advertisers began to measure success not by immediate sales, but by cultural impact. A successful Super Bowl ad meant a place in American memory. Behind this transformation lay a deeper story about psychology. The Super Bowl happens once a year, but it occupies a permanent space in the cultural imagination. It combines ritual, emotion, and community. Every element is designed to trigger anticipation. The ads leverage that energy, tapping into the emotional openness of a nation celebrating together. This is why the best Super Bowl commercials evoke laughter, nostalgia, and empathy. They speak directly to shared human feelings. Viewers are not just watching, they are participating in a collective experience. As the years passed, the lines between sport, entertainment, and commerce blurred completely. The halftime shows became musical extravaganzas. The pre-game coverage turned into hours of storytelling and analysis. Every second of the broadcast was monetized, and every moment was branded. What had begun as a championship game evolved into a media ecosystem feeding on attention, emotion, and aspiration. By the time the new millennium arrived, the Super Bowl had become a global event. It was no longer confined to American living rooms. Satellite television, internet streaming, and social media expanded its reach. Advertisers realized that this was not only a national broadcast, but an international stage. The tone of the commercials began to shift toward universal themes: hope, unity, humor, and human connection. Even those who knew nothing about football watched for the spectacle of the ads. This transformation created a new kind of cultural memory. The Super Bowl became one of the few moments when people from different backgrounds experienced the same thing at the same time. But what they remembered was no longer the game itself. Ask someone about Super Bowl 20 or 34, and many will struggle to recall the final score. Ask about the Apple commercial, the Budweiser frogs, or the Clydesdales marching through snow, and they will recall every detail. These images became cultural heirlooms, passed from one generation to the next. The power of those memories is not accidental. Each commercial is engineered through research, psychology, and storytelling craft. Advertisers study what makes people feel, what makes them laugh, what makes them cry. They build stories around archetypes and emotions that have defined humanity for centuries. In doing so, they create moments that feel more authentic than reality. There is an irony at the heart of this. The ads that move us most are designed to sell something. They manipulate emotion in ways that feel personal, yet that manipulation has become accepted, even celebrated. The Super Bowl is the one night when viewers willingly surrender to persuasion. They expect to be moved, to be entertained, to be inspired. It is an exchange that feels sacred in its familiarity. Television created this phenomenon, but technology amplified it. In the internet age, commercials are no longer confined to the broadcast. They are released online days before the game, teased through social media, and dissected by millions of viewers. The conversation around the ads often begins before kickoff and continues long after the trophy presentation. The game has become a backdrop for a global dialogue about creativity, identity, and emotion. This merging of culture and commerce has had profound implications. The Super Bowl now serves as a mirror reflecting the nation's collective consciousness. Through its ads, one can trace the evolution of social values, humor, and aspiration. In the 1970s, commercials celebrated family and patriotism. In the 1980s, they glorified innovation and rebellion. In the 1990s, they embraced irony and entertainment. In the 2000s and beyond, they began to explore inclusivity, diversity, and nostalgia. Every decade tells its own story, and the Super Bowl has become the archive of that changing narrative. The transformation also reveals something about power. For corporations, the Super Bowl is the most potent form of mass influence ever created. 30 seconds can reshape a company's image, rescue a struggling brand, or spark a global conversation. It is the marketplace of emotion, where the cost of entry is measured in millions and the currency is memory. For the NFL, it is the perfect partnership. The league gains prestige, money, and global reach, while brands attach themselves to the spectacle of excellence and victory. This documentary explores that world in depth. It examines how advertising, psychology, and culture intertwined to turn a game into a global institution. It reveals how the emotional engineering behind Super Bowl commercials mirrors the same human impulses that drive competition on the field. Both the athlete and the advertiser chase victory, legacy, and immortality. Both operate under immense pressure to perform perfectly in a fleeting moment. Over the next chapters, we will uncover the hidden mechanics of this empire. We will trace the evolution from simple commercials to cinematic masterpieces. We will examine the economics of attention and the psychology of memory. We will meet the creative minds who turned 30 seconds into art and the corporate forces that transformed entertainment into manipulation. We will explore the paradox of beauty and control, inspiration and profit. The story of Super Bowl advertising is not only about commerce. It is about culture itself. It is about how a nation came to define itself through images and emotions carefully designed to sell. It is about the intersection of sport, storytelling, and the search for meaning. It is about how the most sacred moments of collective joy can also be the most calculated. In the end, the Super Bowl became more than America's biggest game. It became its greatest mirror. What we choose to remember from it says more about who we are than who won. The journey through its history is a journey through our shared imagination, where competition and consumption became indistinguishable, and where every frame carries the weight of meaning and memory. When the first Super Bowl aired on January 15, 1967, few could have imagined that it would one day become the most powerful marketing platform in the world. The game itself was not yet a national ritual. It was an experiment, a merger between two rival leagues, the NFL and the AFL, each trying to prove superiority not only on the field but on television. The concept of a unified championship was still foreign, and the country had no established traditions for what would become the most watched event in American sports. Yet even then, hidden between the plays and the punts, the seeds of a broadcast empire were being quietly planted. That afternoon, the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum was only half full. Tickets went for $12, and many were left unsold. The audience at home was split between two networks, CBS and NBC, who shared the broadcast rights. Both wanted the prestige of carrying the first Super Bowl, and neither was willing to yield the moment to the other. As a result, the same game aired twice. Two separate crews, two separate commentary teams, two sets of commercials. It was chaotic, but also revolutionary. Television executives were beginning to see the potential of sports as more than entertainment. It was a platform that could unite the nation in real time. The first commercial breaks were modest by any standard. A 30-second spot cost around $40,000, a far cry from the millions that would later define the Super Bowl economy. The ads themselves were simple, local, often uninspired. Automobile dealerships, tire companies, and local restaurants filled the airwaves with static imagery and voiceover slogans. There were no celebrities, no special effects, no cinematic production. The audience did not yet watch the game for the commercials. They were simply the pauses in between. Still, something changed that day. CBS and NBC discovered that the shared broadcast had drawn an audience of more than 60 million Americans. It was not just a game anymore. It was a collective experience, one that crossed regions, demographics, and ideologies. For a brief few hours, America watched the same story unfold through the same glowing screens. Advertisers noticed. In the years that followed, the Super Bowl's reach grew faster than anyone expected. By the early 1970s, ratings began to rival those of the biggest entertainment programs. The ads became slightly more polished. Coca-Cola, Ford, and McDonald's began to test the waters, realizing that the game offered something no other platform could: guaranteed attention. Even viewers who cared little for football were drawn to the spectacle. The combination of competition, celebrity, and national pride created a unique environment for brands to imprint themselves on the public imagination. By the mid-1970s, network executives recognized that they were no longer selling airtime. They were selling moments. The broadcast was not just a sports event. It was an ecosystem of emotion and anticipation. Each break in play offered the chance to attach a company's name to a national mood. The value of a 30-second spot doubled, then tripled. Advertisers began competing not only for time, but for impact. The creative arms race had begun. Behind the scenes, a quiet transformation was unfolding in the relationship between sports and commerce. The NFL understood that its growing power was tied to television. Commissioner Pete Rozelle, a former public relations expert, saw the league as a product and the Super Bowl as its ultimate commercial. He believed in the idea of presentation, of crafting football as a family-friendly spectacle that appealed as much to advertisers as to fans. Under Rozelle's vision, the league negotiated contracts that guaranteed exclusivity and consistency. The Super Bowl was to become the anchor of America's television calendar. By the late 1970s, advertisers were treating the event as a cultural stage rather than a simple media buy. Executives began to plan campaigns months in advance, matching creative strategies to the projected storylines of the season. The question was no longer how to sell a product, but how to become part of the nation's conversation. Television became both the medium and the message, shaping not only what people saw, but how they remembered it. One of the earliest signs of this transformation came during Super Bowl X in 1976. Xerox aired a humorous commercial featuring a monk named Brother Dominic, who used a copier to replicate ancient manuscripts. The ad was clever, human, and instantly memorable. It was also one of the first Super Bowl spots to become a talking point outside of the game. Newspapers covered it, morning shows replayed it, and for the first time, an advertisement had stolen a piece of the spotlight from the field itself. That moment signaled a deeper shift. The Super Bowl had become a testing ground for cultural storytelling. It was no longer enough for a company to advertise. They had to perform. The audience was learning to expect entertainment during every pause, and brands were learning to deliver it. Each year raised the stakes. And each success reinforced the notion that the real competition was not between the teams, but between the advertisers. As television technology advanced, so did the ambition behind the commercials. Color broadcasting made images more vivid. Music licensing gave ads emotional resonance, and celebrity endorsements added glamour. By the end of the decade, advertisers had turned what was once filler into a national art form. The Super Bowl was now more than a sporting event. It was a mirror reflecting America's imagination, its desires, and its contradictions. Through it all, the networks benefited most. The rising cost of commercial slots turned the Super Bowl into an annual windfall for broadcasters. Each year broke new records for ad revenue. Sponsors no longer questioned whether it was worth it. The question became how much they could afford to pay for relevance. The game had transformed into an advertising cathedral, where brands sought salvation through 30 seconds of collective attention. The irony was striking. What began as a football experiment had become a corporate ritual. The audience, once united by sport, was now united by consumption. Yet the relationship felt natural, almost inevitable. America's two great passions, competition and commerce, had found perfect alignment. The Super Bowl offered both in one package, wrapped in spectacle and delivered through screens that reached every living room in the nation. By the time the 1980s arrived, the foundation was complete. The cost of a single Super Bowl ad surpassed $300,000, and creative agencies were preparing entire campaigns built around that one night. The first Super Bowl had been about uncertainty and experimentation. The next 2 decades would be about control, precision, and dominance. The networks understood the formula. Create a moment so massive that missing it felt like missing history. It was a formula that worked. By transforming an ordinary championship into an annual cultural celebration, television had created not only a new kind of entertainment, but a new kind of power. The Super Bowl became the point where commerce and emotion converged, where brand loyalty was born not from logic, but from shared experience. The audience was no longer watching ads. They were remembering them, quoting them, living them. The first Super Bowl ads may have been simple, but their legacy was profound. They marked the beginning of a partnership that would redefine both sports and marketing. The world had witnessed the birth of a broadcast empire, one built not on athletic triumph, but on the promise of attention. And from that promise, an entire cultural economy would rise, one that blurred the line between the game and the message. The whistle blew, the game ended, and the networks counted their profits. The story was no longer just about football. It was about what America was willing to watch and what it was willing to believe. The 1970s were a decade of reckoning for America. The optimism of the post-war years had faded into something quieter, more uncertain. The nation was coming out of Vietnam, scarred and divided. Watergate had shaken faith in leadership. Inflation was rising. and families across the country were questioning the direction of the American story. The world felt heavier. Yet, in the midst of that cultural fatigue, something unexpected began to emerge on television screens each January. The Super Bowl, once a simple football game, became a place where America's self-image was being rewritten 30 seconds at a time. The advertisers of the 1970s understood something essential about the national mood. The public did not want confrontation. They wanted comfort. They wanted reminders of who they believed they were before everything had come undone. Commercials during the Super Bowl became small windows of reassurance. Fragments of a country trying to see itself again in the glow of the screen. The slogans were not about products. They were about belonging. One of the earliest examples came in 1972 when Coca-Cola, already an icon of American optimism, leaned into nostalgia with its simple message of togetherness. It was not yet the era of grand cinematic production, but even then, the brand understood tone. Families gathered around kitchen tables. Children laughed in backyards. The commercials were slow, warm, familiar. They carried a quiet promise that the good days were not gone, only waiting to be remembered. The same year, the Super Bowl had become the most-watched television broadcast in the country. For advertisers, this meant that the audience they reached during those few hours represented the collective heartbeat of the nation. The power was unprecedented. In a time when America was losing faith in institutions, brands stepped in to fill the emotional vacuum. The corporations became storytellers, and the Super Bowl became their stage. By the mid-1970s, the strategy had evolved from selling to healing. General Motors ran ads that celebrated American craftsmanship, showing workers on factory floors building cars with pride. McDonald's leaned on family, depicting children sharing moments over simple meals. Even beer companies like Budweiser wrapped their image in community, showing neighborhood gatherings and shared laughter. It was not about the beverage or the car. It was about the feeling of being part of something steady and familiar in a world that seemed to change too fast. What made this period remarkable was the unity between commerce and culture. For the first time, the Super Bowl was being used not just to sell products, but to manage the emotional temperature of the country. The game became a form of cultural therapy. Every ad break offered reassurance that despite the turbulence of the decade, the American dream was still intact, still waiting for anyone willing to believe in it. In 1975, Xerox returned to the Super Bowl with another memorable campaign that captured this mood. The brand had previously introduced Brother Dominic, the monk who discovered the power of the copier. Now, the story was extended, transforming technology into something human and uplifting. It was clever, funny, and deeply comforting. The idea was simple. Progress was not something to fear, but something to embrace, as long as it stayed rooted in familiar values. This was the heart of the 1970s Super Bowl advertising philosophy. Every brand sought to merge modernity with memory. They sold innovation wrapped in nostalgia, technology softened by humanity. It was a delicate balance, but it resonated deeply with audiences who were craving hope. Even in the most commercial moments, there was a whisper of sincerity, a promise that the American story was still one of resilience and redemption. Coca-Cola's Hilltop campaign in 1971, though not originally aired during the Super Bowl, influenced the tone of the entire decade's advertising. Its vision of people from around the world singing in harmony became a cultural symbol. Super Bowl advertisers learned from that example, realizing that emotion could transcend sales. The message did not need to shout. It only needed to remind people of what they wanted to feel. By 1977, this emotional marketing had become a template. The commercials were still relatively simple compared to what would follow in the 1980s, but the intent was clear. Advertisers were not trying to provoke thought. They were trying to create connection. The slogans were invitations to trust. The camera lingered on faces, families, landscapes, and small acts of kindness. These moments, stitched between tackles and touchdowns, became a national pause for reflection. The Super Bowl was transforming into something larger than a sporting event. It was becoming a mirror, reflecting back an idealized image of the country. As political and social unrest simmered outside, the game and its commercials offered a kind of sanctuary. The American dream, increasingly fragile in real life, was being reassembled through marketing narratives that promised unity and renewal. There was also a deeper strategy behind this shift. Advertisers recognized that emotional connection led to loyalty. The more a viewer associated a product with stability, the less likely they were to question its value. By selling emotion, brands could transcend competition. And nowhere was that emotional sale more effective than during the Super Bowl, when tens of millions of Americans were already gathered in shared anticipation. This new emotional marketing also benefited the NFL. The league's image of heroism, teamwork, and perseverance fit perfectly within the same framework. Every commercial break reinforced the values that the game itself seemed to embody. The result was a feedback loop between sport and commerce. The players on the field represented strength and unity, while the ads reinforced what that strength and unity meant in everyday life. When the decade drew to a close, the Super Bowl had become something sacred in American culture. It was more than a championship. It was a celebration of identity. The ads were no longer interruptions, but integral parts of the experience. Viewers expected them. They talked about them. They remembered them. The commercial break had become an emotional intermission, a moment to feel good about being part of something larger than oneself. By the 1979 Super Bowl, the transformation was complete. That year, Coca-Cola aired what would become one of the most beloved ads in American history. Mean Joe Greene. The spot opened with a young boy offering his hero a bottle of Coke after a tough game. Greene's smile, his quiet gratitude, and the simple kindness of the moment captured everything the decade's advertising had been building toward. It was a story of redemption, generosity, and human warmth. The ad was not about soda. It was about grace. Mean Joe Greene changed everything. It blurred the line between sport and storytelling, between commercial and culture. The ad aired once, yet it became immortal. People wept, smiled, and quoted it for years. It embodied the emotional marketing that had defined the 1970s, and it proved that an advertisement could carry as much emotional weight as the game itself. The Super Bowl had officially become America's emotional broadcast. By the end of the decade, the strategy of selling the American dream through the Super Bowl was no longer subtle. It was institutional. Brands had learned that nostalgia, unity, and optimism were not just values, but currencies. The nation, weary from conflict and cynicism, found comfort in the ritual of shared watching. Each year, for one Sunday in January, it could believe again in its own reflection. The Super Bowl had begun as a broadcast experiment. It was the country's mirror. And in that reflection, the dream was alive, even if only for 30 seconds at a time. In January 1984, America witnessed something it had never seen before during a football game. The Super Bowl was already a national ritual, a stage for both sport and spectacle. But on that night, during the third quarter of Super Bowl XVIII, a single commercial changed the meaning of advertising forever. It was Apple's 1984. Directed by Ridley Scott and produced with the gravity of a Hollywood film. It ran for just 60 seconds, yet it shifted the landscape of marketing, technology, and culture. It was more than an ad. It was a declaration. Before 1984, commercials were familiar and safe. They sold warmth, humor, and family values. They comforted more than they provoked. But Apple's message was different. It was confrontational, cinematic, and symbolic. It invited the viewer not to buy a product, but to join a rebellion. The ad opened on a gray industrial landscape. Workers marched in unison, heads bowed, faces expressionless. They were identical, obedient, trapped in a cold authoritarian world. On a massive screen, a big brother-like figure delivered a speech about control and conformity. Then came the interruption. A lone athlete, A woman in bright orange shorts sprinted down the aisle, carrying a hammer. She spun, hurled it into the screen, and shattered the face of tyranny. The explosion flooded the room with light. The message appeared on January 24th. Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh, and you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984. It was not a commercial. It was a moment. The audience fell silent. Some cheered. Others were confused, but everyone remembered it. The world had never seen an advertisement like this on live television. The creative ambition, the budget, and the audacity were unprecedented. It was science fiction as marketing, rebellion as branding. Apple had turned a product launch into mythology. The genius of 1984 lay not only in its production, but in its timing. America was in the middle of a technological awakening. Personal computers were still a mystery to most households, and the idea of a user-friendly machine felt revolutionary. The ad positioned Apple as a symbol of freedom in a world dominated by conformity. A direct challenge to IBM, which represented corporate power and standardization. It turned a tech company into a movement. Ridley Scott, fresh off the success of Blade Runner, brought cinematic authority to the concept. The ad cost nearly $1 million to produce, an extraordinary sum for its time. But Apple's co-founder Steve Jobs saw it not as a commercial expense, but as an investment in identity. He wanted the Macintosh to feel like a cultural awakening, not a piece of hardware. To him, technology was art, rebellion, and liberation all at once. The Super Bowl was the only stage big enough to carry that message. What made 1984 revolutionary was how it redefined what an ad could do. It did not show the product, list its features, or explain its value. Instead, it used metaphor. It told a story about control, freedom, and imagination. The Macintosh was presented as the hammer that would break the walls of sameness. It invited the audience to feel rather than to think. That emotional leap marked the beginning of a new era in advertising. From that moment forward, commercials were no longer just about persuasion. They were about identity. When the ad aired, CBS executives were unsure how audiences would respond. Some worried it was too strange, too dark, too political. But when the commercial ended, the phones began ringing. News outlets called to ask who had made it. Newspapers wrote about it the next morning. People who had missed the game sought out replays. It became a cultural event. And within days, the Macintosh sold out its initial inventory. Apple had proven that 1 minute of television could redefine an entire industry. The impact on advertising was immediate. Agencies across the country realized that the Super Bowl was no longer just a high-profile opportunity. It was the stage where cultural statements were made. The audience had changed. They were no longer passive consumers. They were participants in a shared cultural moment. Every brand now wanted its own 1984, a story that transcended the product and entered the collective imagination. For the NFL and its broadcasters, this shift was a windfall. The success of 1984 elevated the commercial break to an event in itself. People began tuning in not just for the game, but to see what brands would unveil next. Ratings soared. Advertisers competed for the same emotional real estate Apple had conquered. The price of a 30-second slot crossed the $500,000 mark. And by the end of the decade, it would surpass $1 million. The ad had not only sold computers, it had sold the idea that commercials could become cultural phenomena. Critics and academics later analyzed 1984 as a piece of visual literature. It was a commentary on surveillance, conformity, and technology. Yet its brilliance lay in how it turned those heavy themes into a mass-market message. It worked on every level. For the casual viewer, it was thrilling and mysterious. For the intellectual, it was allegory. For Apple, it was perfect branding. It transformed the company from a niche manufacturer into a symbol of creativity and rebellion. The legacy of 1984 also revealed something deeper about the American psyche. The country had entered a new era of consumer identity. The products people bought were becoming reflections of who they believed themselves to be. Apple tapped into that instinct better than anyone. To own a Macintosh was to declare independence from the machine age. The advertisement turned buying a computer into an act of self-expression. That psychological shift would define the next 4 decades of marketing. For advertising executives, the lesson was clear. To succeed at the Super Bowl was to create myth. It was not about the number of impressions or the clarity of the message. It was about resonance. The ad had to become part of conversation, memory, and culture. From that year forward, every major brand sought to capture that same lightning. Budweiser, Nike, Pepsi, and countless others began investing millions, not in airtime, but in meaning. In the broader history of television, 1984 marked the end of innocence. The simple jingles and smiling faces of earlier decades gave way to sophistication, symbolism, and narrative. The audience was ready for depth. They wanted stories that spoke to who they were, even if only through a product. Advertising had become art, and the Super Bowl had become its museum. As the years passed, the legend of the ad grew. Marketing textbooks dissected it. Film schools analyzed its structure. Industry conferences praised it as the most important commercial ever made. And yet, what made it enduring was its simplicity. It was about courage in the face of conformity, imagination against control. It reminded people that even in a world of mass production, individuality still mattered. For Apple, the message would echo through decades of branding. Every campaign that followed carried the same DNA. The Think Different slogan of the 1990s was the natural successor to the hammer throw of 1984. The company never returned to the Super Bowl with the same force again, but it did not need to. It had already set the standard. Looking back, the 1984 commercial did more than change advertising. It changed how America saw itself in the media mirror. It proved that the intersection of commerce and creativity could produce something profound. It taught corporations that authenticity could be manufactured, emotion could be engineered, and culture could be packaged in under a minute. The roar of the crowd that night faded quickly. But the echo of that single ad still lingers. It was not just a moment of marketing genius. It was the birth of the modern Super Bowl as we know it, where brands fight not just for attention, but for immortality. It began with a hallway, a tired football player, and a bottle of Coca-Cola. The year was 1979, and the ad, titled "Hey Kid, Catch," would soon transcend the boundaries of sports and marketing alike. The story of Mean Joe Greene and the boy who offered him a Coke is more than a commercial. It is the first time the Super Bowl became a national mirror, reflecting what America wanted to believe about itself. Joe Greene was one of the most intimidating defensive linemen of his era, known for his strength and fury on the field. Yet Coca-Cola's creative team saw something deeper in his persona. They recognized the contrast between the fierce competitor and the man behind the helmet. That duality became the emotional core of the ad. The commercial opens with Greene limping down a tunnel after a grueling game, sweat-stained and exhausted. A small boy, standing in awe, offers him a bottle of Coke. Greene hesitates, accepts, and drinks. Then, in a moment of quiet humanity, he turns and tosses his jersey to the boy. It lasts 60 seconds, yet it changed everything. Viewers did not see a product being sold. They saw a man transformed. Kindness triumph over pain. And they saw Coca-Cola not as a beverage, but as a bridge between people. The ad first aired during a regular NFL game, but it became immortal after running during the 1980 Super Bowl. By the time it ended, the nation had found its emotional blueprint for commercial storytelling. What made it powerful was not just the emotion, but the precision of it. The timing of Greene's nod, the weight of silence before he tosses his jersey, and the soft swell of the score beneath it. This was not about football anymore. It was about the redemption of American spirit after a decade of disillusionment. The 1970s had left the country bruised from war, scandal, and inflation. Advertising, at its best, became a language of healing. Coca-Cola's message that even the toughest man could be moved by a simple act of kindness resonated with a culture desperate for sincerity. Behind the scenes, the ad was a masterclass in psychological understanding. Coca-Cola's marketing team knew that the product was secondary. They wanted to evoke a feeling, comfort, nostalgia, and unity. The genius was that the Coke bottle was not the hero. The connection was every frame reinforced the idea that goodness was still possible, that beneath cynicism, decency remained. When Greene smiled, it felt like America smiled back. That moment triggered a seismic shift in advertising philosophy. The age of rational selling, where brands emphasized quality, price, and features, began to fade. In its place emerged emotional storytelling, where the product existed only as the emotional catalyst. Companies across industries began chasing that formula. They learned that if you could make someone feel, you could make them remember. The impact was immediate. Surveys after the 1980 Super Bowl revealed that audiences recalled Coca-Cola's ad more vividly than the game itself. In fact, they spoke about it as if it were a short film, not a commercial. People described the ad's moral lesson, the boy's innocence, and Greene's transformation, rarely mentioning the drink. The Super Bowl had officially become a platform for emotional connection rather than information delivery. Mean Joe Greene also demonstrated something subtler: the fusion of sports mythology and brand mythology. Football players had always been seen as warriors, larger-than-life figures who embodied strength and endurance. Coca-Cola took that image and humanized it. They turned a gridiron titan into a symbol of humility and gratitude. By doing so, they connected the drama of sports to the emotions of everyday life. The ad's success proved that the most powerful brand messages were not about dominance or success, but about vulnerability. From that point forward, emotional manipulation became the most potent weapon in the advertiser's arsenal. Companies began to explore every spectrum of feeling: nostalgia, pride, sadness, and even loss. They learned that emotion bypassed skepticism. Logic could be debated, but feeling could not. The Super Bowl, watched by millions in a shared moment, became the perfect emotional amplifier. Throughout the 1980s and beyond, that Coca-Cola framework became the invisible backbone of countless iconic ads. Budweiser's use of loyal animals, Pepsi's celebration of youth rebellion, and Nike's focus on personal triumph all traced their lineage back to the emotional sincerity of Mean Joe Greene. Each brand sought to replicate the feeling of connection rather than sell the object itself. They were not selling sugar, or shoes, or beer. They were selling identity, reassurance, and belonging. This emotional strategy also transformed the way companies measured success. Before, ad performance was tied to product sales and market share. After Greene, success meant something else: cultural penetration. Did the ad make people cry? Did they talk about it the next day? Did it become part of conversation? Brands began chasing not just market dominance, but emotional immortality. There was also something profoundly American about the ad's symbolism. The image of a wounded athlete finding redemption through kindness mirrored the country's own yearning for moral recovery. In the wake of political scandals and social unrest, Coca-Cola offered an emotional reset, a reminder that unity could still be found in the simplest of gestures. That message was not accidental. It was engineered. The brilliance of the ad was how seamlessly it wove together personal emotion with national identity. In many ways, Mean Joe Greene marked the moment when advertising became art, not because of its visual beauty, but because of its emotional architecture. It operated on the same level as cinema, using story, character, and pacing to move an audience. The Super Bowl provided the canvas, but Coca-Cola provided the narrative form. The modern Super Bowl ad owes its soul to that template. Even decades later, the ad's legacy endures. It has been parodied, referenced, and remade countless times, yet its original sincerity still cuts through. It remains one of the few commercials ever inducted into the American Advertising Hall of Fame. More importantly, it still defines what a successful Super Bowl ad should feel like. Not clever, but human. That emotional lineage continues every February, when viewers tear up at a dog waiting by the roadside or a soldier surprising his family. They are responding to a storytelling structure that Coca-Cola perfected nearly half a century ago. What began as a single hallway exchange became the DNA of American advertising. In that sense, Mean Joe Greene was more than a commercial. It was a covenant between brand and audience, an unspoken agreement that advertising could make us feel better about ourselves. At least for 30 seconds, it proved that the right story, told at the right moment, could heal a fractured nation. And it cemented the Super Bowl, not merely as a sports event, but as an emotional ritual where brands became the poets of collective feeling. By the mid-1980s, the Super Bowl had evolved from a simple championship game into a cultural phenomenon. A stage where the nation gathered to witness both athletic prowess and commercial spectacle. What began as a modest experiment in broadcasting had transformed into a platform where brands vied not merely for attention, but for identity. Companies were no longer selling products. They were selling ideas, ideals, and aspirations. They sought to become part of the mythology of the game, to attach themselves to the ritualized heroism that unfolded on the field. The cost of this ambition was staggering, yet the stakes were irresistible. 30-second spots during the Super Bowl now commanded prices that exceeded $1 million. For many advertisers, this was not an expense, but an investment in cultural immortality. The logic was simple, yet profound. The Super Bowl audience represented the collective consciousness of the nation. Tens of millions of viewers, united in a shared experience, were watching the most visible and memorable television broadcast of the year. Capturing even a fraction of that attention could define a brand's relevance for the next 12 months. The cost was high, but so was the return in social currency. Brands began approaching the Super Bowl as they would approach a national election. Every decision mattered. The imagery, the narrative, the casting, even the soundtrack were meticulously designed to evoke emotion. To tell a story that would resonate beyond the product, advertisers understood that the audience was not passive. These viewers were fans of drama, spectacle, and identity. They craved connection, and the Super Bowl provided the ultimate opportunity to create it. Companies were competing for more than loyalty. They were competing for worship. The psychological link between brand and sports heroism became apparent in the mid-1980s. Athletes were no longer merely players on a field. They were symbols, embodiments of aspiration, courage, and determination. Companies recognized that by associating themselves with these figures, they could transfer the emotional power of sport onto their products. A soft drink, a sneaker, a car could inherit the qualities of victory, strength, and perseverance simply by appearing alongside the icons of football. The connection was both subtle and profound. It was not just marketing, it was mythology, engineering. Nike led the way in this transformation. The company understood that sports and identity were intertwined. Their campaigns highlighted not the technical specifications of their products, but the personal narratives of triumph and struggle. Michael Jordan's ascent, for instance, was not merely a story of athletic achievement. It was a story of resilience, excellence, and aspiration. Nike's commercials and endorsements framed products as vehicles for these ideals. Every purchase became symbolic. Every brand touchpoint a reflection of personal ambition. The Super Bowl amplified this effect exponentially. Coca-Cola and Pepsi were not far behind. By the 1980s, they had refined the formula of emotional advertising into an art form. It was no longer enough to show a family enjoying a soda. Ads now incorporated narrative arcs, humor, and star power. They transformed a 30-second interval into a mini-event within the larger event. The goal was not to persuade rationally, but to seduce emotionally. By attaching products to stories of innocence, redemption, or heroism, brands became part of the audience's identity construction. To buy the product was to participate in the fantasy, to align oneself with the values being portrayed. the economic stakes were immense. Producing a Super Bowl commercial could cost millions, excluding the already exorbitant airtime. Ridley Scott-style cinematic direction, high-profile actors, elaborate sets, and custom music compositions became standard. Every ad became a production in its own right, a small-scale film designed to captivate, inspire, and linger in memory. The question was no longer whether an ad would air successfully, but whether it could be remembered as a cultural moment. Failure was not just a lost investment, it was a missed opportunity to occupy the national imagination. This competition for cultural presence altered the very nature of advertising. Brands learned that they could not rely on logic or product differentiation alone. Emotional resonance, narrative engagement, and mythic association became the metrics of success. The Super Bowl offered the perfect laboratory. Its audience was large, diverse, and highly attentive. For a few hours, every viewer was a captive participant in a collective experience. Companies that understood this dynamic leveraged it to cement their place in American consciousness. The cost of fame extended beyond dollars. Brands faced the pressure of cultural scrutiny. A poorly executed ad could backfire, damaging both reputation and market perception. In the era of the Super Bowl, where every commercial was dissected, discussed, and circulated, risk was high. Companies had to be daring, yet precise. They were operating on the cutting edge of psychology, culture, and media. The most successful campaigns balanced creativity with strategy, spectacle with sincerity. They were more than ads. They were exercises in social engineering. One of the most striking aspects of this era was the interplay between authenticity and performance. Audiences could detect insincerity, and brands learned that emotional manipulation had to be grounded in credibility. The heroism of athletes, the innocence of children, the joy of communal experiences were powerful because they reflected real human desires and aspirations. Super Bowl ads became mirrors, showing viewers what they wanted to see of themselves. Companies were not merely selling products. They were selling the narrative of who the audience could be. The relationship between Super Bowl ads and hero worship also shaped athlete culture. Players became more than sports figures. They became brand ambassadors, living symbols of aspiration. Their achievements on the field were magnified by commercial association. A touchdown or a sack could now ripple through popular culture, amplified by the brand narratives crafted around them. The commercialization of identity became symbiotic. Athletes and advertisers reinforced each other, creating a feedback loop that heightened both fame and influence. By the end of the 1980s, the Super Bowl had firmly established itself as a proving ground for this new form of advertising. The cost of entry ensured that only the most committed brands participated. The pressure to create impact turned commercials into high art, emotional engineering, and social commentary all at once. Each year, companies competed not only for attention, but for the intangible reward of cultural relevance. A successful Super Bowl ad became part of the national conversation, part of collective memory, and part of the mythology of the game itself. The lessons of this period continue to shape advertising today. Brands understand that identity is the most valuable currency. Emotional connection surpasses product attributes. The Super Bowl remains a proving ground for narrative ambition, a place where companies invest not just in exposure, but in influence. What began as a simple transaction, buying airtime, has become a quest for immortality. The psychology of association, the allure of heroism, and the power of narrative all converge in the 30-second crucible that is the Super Bowl commercial. It was the price of fame, measured not just in dollars, but in cultural presence. Every image, every story, every frame had to earn its place in the minds of viewers. Brands that succeeded were remembered for decades. Those that failed faded into obscurity. The stakes were existential. In this new economy of attention, the Super Bowl was the ultimate stage, and identity was the ultimate commodity. Companies had discovered that the game itself was only part of the spectacle. The ads, the emotional resonance, and the cultural myth-making had become equally important. The audience watched for the action, but they remembered the stories, the heroes, and the messages that unfolded between plays. Super Bowl fame was no longer about touchdowns. It was about recognition, admiration, and the subtle art of embedding oneself into the collective imagination. The transformation of advertising into a tool for identity would define the decades to come. It marked the point where corporations became cultural authors, athletes became archetypes, and viewers became participants in a shared myth. The price of fame was high, but the payoff was enduring. Brands that mastered the Super Bowl earned a form of immortality. Their narratives intertwined with the memories of a nation. By the 1990s, the Super Bowl had evolved beyond a single-day event. It had become a battlefield not only for football supremacy, but for corporate dominance. Advertisers recognized that the game offered more than just a captive audience. It offered cultural legitimacy. The stage was national, the stakes astronomical, and the audience discerning. The decade saw the rise of the ad wars, a competition as fierce and calculated as the plays unfolding on the field. Pepsi challenged Coca-Cola, Nike challenged Reebok, and every company that had once approached the Super Bowl cautiously now embraced aggressive innovation and strategic risk. Pepsi and Coca-Cola, the two titans of soft drinks, had been competing for decades, but the 1990s elevated their rivalry to an art form. Every year, brands tried to outdo each other in creativity, humor, and spectacle. It was no longer sufficient to produce a touching story or a catchy jingle. The audience expected excitement, surprise, and originality. Pepsi's campaigns featuring stars like Michael Jackson and Cindy Crawford were bold, flashy, and culturally resonant. Coca-Cola responded with storytelling rooted in warmth, unity, and emotional resonance. The battle was not only about market share, but about shaping the national imagination. Each brand sought to dominate the conversation, turning commercials into events that fans anticipated almost as much as the game itself. Nike and Reebok engaged in a parallel conflict within the sporting goods industry. Nike, having already revolutionized athlete marketing with the Air Jordan campaigns, brought the Super Bowl stage into the center of its strategy. Reebok, determined to challenge Nike's dominance, responded with high-concept ads featuring star athletes, extreme sports, and aspirational narratives. The 1990s saw athletic performance marketed not merely as a physical achievement, but as an emotional journey. These commercials framed competition in human terms, showing struggle, triumph, and personal evolution. Nike and Reebok were selling more than shoes. They were selling identity, aspiration, and cultural participation. What made the 1990s distinct was the interplay between creativity and escalation. Each year, advertisers aimed to top the previous year's spectacle. The budgets soared. Production values reached cinematic levels. Directors known for feature films were recruited. Actors, athletes, and celebrities became integral parts of storytelling. Music was commissioned or sampled to heighten emotional impact. The 30-second ad became a mini-epic, and viewers understood that they were witnessing a rare convergence of commerce, culture, and artistry. The competitive nature of the era changed the way audiences consumed the Super Bowl. Fans arrived at the broadcast not just expecting a game, but anticipating cultural innovation. Ratings were influenced as much by the potential for memorable commercials as by the teams on the field. Water cooler conversations and office debates increasingly focused on the ads themselves, and media outlets began dedicating hours of coverage to analyzing them. The commercials became cultural artifacts, dissected, debated, and celebrated independently from the outcome of the game. Pepsi's 1995 AD, featuring Cindy Crawford, in which she interacts with everyday people in a humorous yet memorable way, became emblematic of the decade's approach. Coco responded with campaigns emphasizing inclusivity, shared experience, and national pride. Neither side simply promoted a product. They created mythologies, miniature narratives designed to evoke emotion, association, and loyalty. The ad wars were no longer transactional. They were symbolic, turning consumer choices into statements of identity. The strategy extended beyond storytelling. Placement, timing, and sequence were meticulously calculated. Advertisers analyzed viewer demographics, game pacing, and historical engagement patterns. They anticipated which moments would capture attention, when audiences were most receptive to humor, and where emotional resonance would hit hardest. The Super Bowl became a laboratory for precision marketing, combining psychology, culture, and production excellence. The 1990s also marked the proliferation of sequel and response campaigns. Brands began referencing previous ads, building narratives that unfolded over multiple years. Pepsi and Coca-Cola, Nike and Reebok, each sought to create continuity and anticipation, turning the Super Bowl into a serialized stage for brand storytelling. Viewers were now participants in an ongoing cultural dialogue, their attention rewarded with innovation, wit, and spectacle. The commercials were no longer isolated moments. They were chapters in an ongoing narrative of rivalry and identity. This escalation had consequences for both viewers and competitors. Audiences developed higher expectations, demanding creativity, authenticity, and emotional engagement. Companies felt the pressure to innovate, as a poorly executed ad could be ridiculed or forgotten, while a successful one could dominate conversation for months. The cost of failure became as visible as the reward of success. The Super Bowl was no longer a broadcast opportunity. It was a proving ground for corporate audacity. The decade's campaigns also highlighted the increasing interdependence between sports, celebrity, and culture. Athletes were elevated beyond their physical achievements into cultural icons. Their presence in commercials added legitimacy, aspiration, and emotional weight. Celebrities, musicians, and actors were carefully selected to amplify narratives, create cross-media resonance, and attract demographic attention. The ads were no longer merely selling, they were signaling. Ownership of identity and cultural relevance became the ultimate prize. Media analysis of this era illustrates how commercials were deeply entwined with national sentiment. Advertisers leveraged nostalgia, humor, and spectacle to tap into collective consciousness. They understood that viewers were looking for more than products. They wanted entertainment, inspiration, and affirmation. The Super Bowl provided the perfect venue, a rare moment where millions could focus simultaneously on a curated blend of sport and storytelling. The event became a mirror of cultural aspiration. By the end of the 1990s, the rules of engagement for Super Bowl advertising were clear. Success required vision, courage, and meticulous execution. The 30-second spot was no longer a simple message. It was a weapon in the battle for cultural relevance. Brands that excelled earned not only immediate attention, but lasting influence. The ad wars had matured into a sophisticated ecosystem of competition, psychology, and spectacle. The legacy of the decade was profound. It transformed the Super Bowl into a global cultural stage. Companies no longer viewed the broadcast as mere advertising space. They saw it as a platform to define identity, to participate in myth-making, and to connect emotionally with audiences in ways that extended far beyond commerce. The rivalry between Pepsi and Coca-Cola, Nike and Reebok, created a template for future decades. It proved that advertising could be as thrilling, dramatic, and consequential as the game itself. The 1990s ad wars established a principle that continues to shape the Super Bowl today. The stakes are no longer limited to immediate sales or market positioning. They encompass cultural presence, emotional resonance, and the capacity to influence collective memory. The game became intertwined with commerce, and commerce became intertwined with culture. Every year, viewers watched not just for football, but for the stories, the heroes, and the spectacles that unfold in the commercials between plays. In that way, the decade transformed the Super Bowl into a dual arena of competition. On one field, teams battled for a championship. On another, companies competed for cultural dominance. Every viewer became a participant in both contests, emotionally invested in athletes, narratives, and brands alike. the ad wars demonstrated that the Super Bowl was no longer simply a sporting event. It was a stage where culture, commerce, and identity collided with intensity and precision. The late 1990s and early 2000s marked a new era for Super Bowl advertising, one defined by humor, shock, and an infusion of pop culture. The game itself had become a ritual, but the commercials now demanded equal attention. Audiences no longer wanted to see only products or emotional narratives. They craved surprise, laughter, and the thrill of celebrity appearances in unexpected contexts. The Super Bowl had evolved into a cultural stage where brands competed for memorability through entertainment as much as through messaging. Humor became a central tool for capturing attention. Unlike the emotional storytelling of Coca-Cola's Mean Joe Greene campaign, comedic ads relied on timing, absurdity, and irony. Viewers had learned to anticipate sentimentality. To stand out, advertisers needed to disrupt expectations, elicit laughter, and leave a lasting impression in a crowded media landscape. The challenge was to balance cleverness with accessibility, ensuring that the joke resonated across demographics without alienating any segment of the audience. One of the defining techniques of the era was the use of celebrity cameos. Stars from film, television, and music brought instant recognition and credibility. Their appearances were often exaggerated or self-parodying, creating a playful contrast with their public personas. Audiences were delighted to see icons in unexpected roles, and this novelty generated buzz both during and after the broadcast. The Super Bowl became a stage not only for brands, but for pop culture itself. A space where the familiar could be reimagined and where humor could serve as a conduit for connection. The power of humor in these ads was closely linked to psychological principles of recall. Studies of advertising effectiveness consistently showed that audiences were more likely to remember an ad that elicited genuine laughter. Comedic timing, absurd scenarios, and clever wordplay created mental anchors, making the brand more memorable, even if the product itself was not the focus. Advertisers recognized that in the context of a 3-hour broadcast filled with anticipation, suspense, and occasional boredom, humor could function as a spike in attention, ensuring that viewers not only noticed the commercial, but retained it. Shock became another tool to captivate audiences. While humor relied on positive surprise, shock sought to provoke astonishment, disbelief, or even controversy. These ads were calculated to dominate water cooler conversations in the days following the game. Whether through unexpected celebrity behavior, unusual visual effects, or provocative storylines, shock ads created a sense of urgency and engagement. In a media environment increasingly saturated with content, shock became a way to cut through noise and ensure the advertisement was discussed, shared, and remembered. Pop culture integration became a strategic component of Super Bowl advertising. Ads referenced movies, music, and television, using the collective knowledge of the audience as shorthand to communicate brand identity. The result was a dynamic interplay between marketing and cultural commentary. Brands were not only selling products, they were signaling relevance, awareness, and cultural literacy. Audiences responded positively when they recognized these references, feeling included in an inside joke or shared narrative. This approach transformed commercials into participatory experiences, inviting viewers to engage mentally and emotionally with the brand. The humorous campaigns of the era also reflected shifts in societal values and media consumption. Audiences increasingly valued entertainment and wit over conventional persuasion. Traditional pitches emphasizing product features or rational benefits no longer commanded the same attention. Super Bowl advertisers adapted by embedding products within stories that entertained first and informed second. Laughter became a bridge to brand trust, establishing a connection that transcended rational evaluation. The audience was willing to forgive absurdity if it was compelling and memorable. An early example of this approach was the Budweiser Frogs campaign. 3 animated frogs croaked their way into national consciousness, capturing attention not through direct product messaging, but through sheer absurdity and charm. Viewers did not remember the specifications of Budweiser beer. They remembered the frogs. Yet this indirect association proved effective in solidifying brand recognition. The success of such campaigns demonstrated that humor could serve as a powerful cognitive shortcut, linking positive emotional response to brand awareness. Celebrity participation amplified this effect. Ads featuring actors, musicians, and athletes leveraged pre-existing cultural capital. Their involvement created instant familiarity and credibility, allowing the advertisement to communicate messages efficiently. Moreover, self-deprecating humor or unexpected role reversals humanize celebrities, making them more relatable and enhancing the emotional connection between brand and audience. The integration of pop culture and humor was not incidental. It was a deliberate strategy to ensure resonance in a fragmented media environment. The rise of humor and shock in Super Bowl advertising also reflected broader societal trends. Audiences were becoming more media savvy, more discerning, and more skeptical of conventional marketing techniques. They demanded creativity, authenticity, and entertainment value. In this context, humor and shock provided both novelty and engagement, rewarding attention with entertainment while subtly reinforcing brand identity. Advertisers who failed to innovate risked obscurity. Those who succeeded created memorable moments that transcended the 30-second slot, influencing cultural discourse and shaping audience expectations. This era also demonstrated the interdependence of narrative and emotion in advertising. Humor and shock were not merely tools of distraction. They were mechanisms for emotional resonance. By embedding products within entertaining narratives, advertisers created associative links that extended beyond the broadcast itself. Audiences remembered the story, the joke, or the spectacle, and in turn, they remembered the brand. The Super Bowl became a laboratory for exploring the limits of emotional and cognitive influence within a compressed time frame. Another important dimension of this period was the democratization of cultural conversation. With the growth of the internet and social media, humorous and shocking ads no longer existed solely within the broadcast window. Clips circulated widely, creating extended engagement and magnifying cultural impact. A memorable commercial could reach millions beyond the live audience, amplifying both brand awareness and cultural relevance. Humor and shock became tools not only for immediate engagement, but for sustained participatory conversation. Brands increasingly recognized that the Super Bowl was the beginning of a narrative, not merely a single moment. By the early 2000s, the expectation of humor and pop culture integration had become institutionalized. Viewers anticipated that the Super Bowl would deliver moments of levity, absurdity, and surprise alongside athletic drama. Brands competed not only for attention, but for memorability and cultural relevance. The 30-second slot became a creative crucible, a space where risk and reward were tightly coupled. Successful ads were those that could entertain, surprise, and create associative resonance with the brand in a single, cohesive narrative. The enduring influence of this period is evident today. The conventions established through humor, celebrity, and pop culture integration continue to shape contemporary Super Bowl advertising. Viewers still expect entertainment, emotional engagement, and cultural references. Brands understand that humor and shock are effective vehicles for identity construction and memory formation. The legacy of the era lies not only in the memorable ads themselves, but in the establishment of a creative standard that prioritizes engagement, emotion, and cultural resonance above traditional persuasion. Super Bowl commercials in this era illustrate a fundamental truth about American media culture. Audiences respond to stories that entertain, surprise, or delight. They reward brands that create shared moments of recognition, laughter, or astonishment. Humor and shock became the tools through which advertisers connected with the nation's collective consciousness, transforming 30-second spots into cultural touchstones. The commercials were no longer subordinate to the game. they became co-equal in importance, shaping memory and conversation in ways the sport itself could not. By understanding this dynamic, advertisers elevated their craft, creating moments that were memorable, shareable, and emotionally resonant. The Super Bowl became a proving ground for the integration of commerce, culture, and entertainment. A stage where humor and shock could convert attention into loyalty and laughter, into lasting brand identity. The era demonstrated that the power of emotion in advertising could be amplified through clever storytelling, pop culture literacy, and precise timing, setting the template for decades to follow. "30-second commercial spots in the early Super Bowls were modest in both cost and expectation. Advertisers paid $40,000 for a limited local audience, uncertain whether the investment would yield measurable impact. Over time, the value of these slots escalated exponentially. By the early 2000s, the average cost of a 30-second advertisement exceeded $3 million. Today, brands routinely invest $7 million or more for the opportunity to reach one of the largest and most engaged audiences on television. This figure alone understates the true value of the exposure, which extends far beyond immediate viewership to cultural influence, social conversation, and brand myth-making. The economics of the Super Bowl are shaped by a delicate symbiosis between networks, the NFL, and advertisers. Networks benefit from massive ratings, which justify extraordinary advertising rates. The NFL, in turn, capitalizes on the visibility of the broadcast to enhance league revenues and brand value. Advertisers gain a platform for storytelling that reaches tens of millions simultaneously, providing a level of attention unmatched in any other broadcast context. Each stakeholder relies on the others to maintain the cycle of value creation. Without high-quality production and athletic spectacle, the commercials would lose impact. Without the commercials, the network and the league would lose the economic incentive to sustain the grandeur of the event. The production costs of a Super Bowl commercial further illustrate the scale of the industry. Beyond the cost of airtime, advertisers often invest millions more in concept development, talent acquisition, cinematography, special effects, music licensing, and post-production. These campaigns resemble feature films compressed into 30-second vignettes. Directors with Hollywood credentials are frequently recruited to craft cinematic narratives that can elicit emotional, cognitive, and social responses from a vast and diverse audience. The stakes are high because a successful ad can generate not only immediate revenue, but long-term brand equity and cultural recognition. Networks, in turn, have created an infrastructure designed to maximize both economic and cultural return. The Super Bowl is marketed as an event beyond the game itself. Pre-game coverage, halftime previews, and post-game analysis build anticipation and engagement. Media partnerships, cross-platform promotion, and integration with digital and social media extend reach. Every viewer becomes a potential participant in an ongoing conversation, amplifying the value of commercial content. In essence, The broadcast functions as a carefully orchestrated media ecosystem where every element reinforces the others to maintain economic and cultural dominance. The Super Bowl is remembered for moments that exist outside the confines of the field. Fans can recall the way three frogs croaked in perfect harmony, the sight of a puppy nestled among a group of Clydesdales, or a slogan that lodged itself into the national lexicon. Yet few remember the precise yardage of a decisive play, the identity of the referees, or even the final score. This phenomenon is not mere coincidence. It is the result of carefully crafted psychological mechanisms embedded within advertising, leveraging the ways humans perceive, process, and retain information. At the core of this process is emotional storytelling. Humans are wired to remember events that evoke strong feelings. A 30-second advertisement that makes viewers laugh, cry, or feel awe creates a neurological imprint that surpasses the impact of rational information, such as statistics or tactical plays. These emotional triggers activate the amygdala and related neural networks, enhancing the consolidation of memory in the hippocampus. In other words, viewers remember how they felt more vividly than what occurred. A commercial featuring a child, a beloved animal, or a triumphant hero can lodge itself in memory far more effectively than a numerical score or a fleeting athletic maneuver. Repetition is another critical factor. The Super Bowl is broadcast to millions of viewers simultaneously, creating shared experiences that are discussed, replayed, and analyzed across media platforms. Memorable advertisements are repeated in previews, social media posts, and press coverage, reinforcing memory consolidation. This repetition strengthens neural pathways, ensuring that certain images, sounds, or narratives remain accessible long after the broadcast ends. It is why iconic commercials continue to surface in collective consciousness decades later. Viewers do not merely watch them, they rehearse them mentally and socially. Humor operates as a particularly effective mnemonic device. Laughter triggers the release of endorphins and dopamine, enhancing engagement and attentional focus. A joke or absurd scenario captures attention in a way that standard messaging cannot. This biochemical response makes the experience pleasurable and memorable, embedding the brand within the positive emotional context. The success of campaigns like the Budweiser Frogs or Snickers' playful celebrity interventions illustrates how humor can convert attention into lasting recall. The brain links amusement to the stimulus, making the brand itself part of the emotional experience. Cognitive contrast also plays a role in memorability. Super Bowl commercials often juxtapose the expected with the unexpected. A familiar celebrity acting unusually, a surreal visual element, or a sudden plot twist captures attention by violating predictions. Humans are inherently attuned to anomalies because they signal importance. Advertisements that exploit this principle leverage surprise to create stronger memory encoding. The contrast between expectation and reality triggers heightened neural activity, which strengthens the likelihood that the commercial will be remembered even in a crowded media landscape. Visual storytelling further enhances retention. Iconic imagery, whether it is a football player handing a jersey to a child or a giant inflatable animal navigating a pastoral landscape, engages the brain's visual cortex and spatial memory systems. Unlike abstract information, which is often fleeting, vivid visual stimuli create a sense of presence and realism, making the experience more tangible and lasting. These images become anchors, reference points that viewers recall with remarkable precision years later. The combination of strong visuals with humor or emotional content ensures that memory is both encoded and retrievable. Narrative structure is another critical element. Super Bowl commercials often follow a micro-story arc, with a clear beginning, escalation, and resolution within 30 seconds. The brain is particularly receptive to stories because they provide a framework for encoding complex information efficiently. By embedding a product or brand within a narrative that has emotional stakes and resolution, advertisers exploit the brain's natural affinity for story. Viewers do not remember isolated messages. They remember sequences of events and their associated emotions, which allows the brand to become inseparable from the narrative. Social reinforcement amplifies these psychological effects. Viewers discuss commercials with friends, family, and colleagues, both during and after the broadcast. Water cooler conversations, online forums, and social media exchanges function as rehearsal mechanisms, consolidating memory and extending the cultural impact of the advertisement. This communal processing creates shared memory, turning individual recall into collective consciousness. A memorable Super Bowl ad thus becomes more than a marketing tool. It becomes a social event, woven into the fabric of collective memory. Timing and placement within the broadcast also influence recall. Advertisers carefully consider the flow of the game, selecting moments when viewers' attention is heightened or when emotional susceptibility is greatest. Early game humor primes audiences, mid-game spectacles leverage suspense, and end-game narratives capitalize on heightened attention during climactic plays. The sequencing of commercials is intentional, engineered to maximize both immediate impact and long-term memory retention. Viewers subconsciously register the rhythm, intensity, and contrast of each spot, reinforcing recall beyond conscious awareness. Neuromarketing studies corroborate these observations. Research using functional magnetic resonance imaging shows that emotionally charged commercials activate regions of the brain associated with reward, empathy, and memory encoding. Humor, surprise, and narrative cohesion enhance activity in these networks, while repetitive motifs and culturally resonant references strengthen recall. Advertisers consciously or intuitively have been exploiting these principles for decades. The result is an audience that remembers commercials more vividly than the game itself, not because of luck, but because of deliberate design. Music and sound design are equally instrumental in memory formation. Auditory cues trigger strong associative memory pathways, particularly when paired with visual or narrative elements. A catchy jingle, a familiar song, or a well-timed sound effect can anchor attention and reinforce emotional resonance. These auditory signatures become mnemonic devices, allowing viewers to recall a brand simply by remembering a melody or rhythmic cue. The combination of visual, auditory, and narrative elements produces multi-sensory encoding that solidifies memory. Cultural resonance adds a final layer. Successful Super Bowl commercials tap into prevailing social norms, collective aspirations, or shared experiences. Viewers are more likely to remember advertisements that reflect their own values, dreams, or humor. By aligning content with cultural identity, advertisers enhance both memorability and emotional impact. This cultural synchronization explains why certain commercials become enduring touchstones, referenced years later in conversation, media, and popular culture. The ads are not ephemeral. They are woven into the social fabric. Understanding the psychology of memory explains why viewers often recall the Clydesdales frogs or iconic slogans more vividly than game outcomes. The brain prioritizes emotional, social, and narrative stimuli over purely factual or analytical information. Advertisers exploit these principles to create powerful impressions in compressed timeframes, ensuring that 30-second spots leave lasting cognitive and emotional traces. The Super Bowl is a uniquely fertile ground for this process because of its scale, attention density, and cultural centrality. This psychological dimension also underscores a larger truth about the modern Super Bowl. The game and the commercials are intertwined in a cognitive ecosystem where emotional impact drives cultural memory. The sport provides context and suspense, but the advertisements leverage psychology to dominate recall. Viewers do not simply watch the game. They participate in a curated experience of narrative, emotion, and collective attention. The Super Bowl is both a competition of athleticism and a stage for engineered memory, where psychology, entertainment, and commerce converge seamlessly. The enduring legacy of this understanding is evident in contemporary advertising strategies. Brands continue to prioritize emotional resonance, humor, and narrative clarity. Social amplification, celebrity involvement, and cultural relevance are recognized as critical factors in memory retention. The Super Bowl remains a laboratory for testing the principles of human attention. cognition, and emotion at a scale unmatched in any other media environment. Understanding the neuroscience and psychology of memory is central to explaining why, decades later, viewers still recall the frogs, the Clydesdales, and the slogans more vividly than any play or score. The intersection of neuroscience, narrative, and spectacle transformed Super Bowl advertising into a cultural phenomenon. By leveraging humor, emotion, repetition, and social reinforcement, advertisers created moments that resonate far beyond the broadcast. Memory, not rational evaluation, became the ultimate metric of success. The Super Bowl is more than a game. It is a platform for crafting collective experience, a crucible in which brands, audiences, and cultural memory are inextricably intertwined. The Super Bowl had long been a canvas for creativity. But the late 1990s and early 2000s saw a transformation that elevated advertising into a cinematic art form. Directors from Hollywood, known for their mastery of suspense, visual storytelling, and spectacle, began approaching Super Bowl commercials with the same intensity and artistry they brought to feature films. Ridley Scott, Michael Bay, David Fincher, and others redefined what was possible in 30 seconds, turning brief advertisements into short films capable of eliciting emotional and psychological impact at an unprecedented scale. Ridley Scott's influence on the landscape of Super Bowl advertising is perhaps the most widely recognized. His work on Apple's iconic 1984 campaign demonstrated that a commercial could function as both a narrative and a spectacle. Scott's use of cinematic techniques, lighting, framing, pacing, and visual symbolism created an immersive experience. The commercial was not simply selling a product, it was selling a story, a cultural vision, and an emotional journey. This approach elevated viewer expectations. Audiences no longer tolerated conventional pitches. They demanded narrative complexity, stylistic sophistication, and emotional resonance. Even in 30-second increments, Michael Bay brought a different sensibility to the Super Bowl. Known for kinetic energy, dynamic camera movement, and explosive spectacle, Bay infused advertisements with urgency and visual drama. His commercials often featured rapid editing, high-stakes scenarios, and meticulously choreographed sequences that captivated viewers. Products were embedded within action, transforming everyday items into objects of desire and wonder. Bay's style reinforced the idea that advertising could entertain as much as it could inform. That excitement and energy could enhance recall and brand identity in ways traditional marketing could not. David Fincher approached the Super Bowl with a meticulous, psychologically driven lens. His attention to detail, atmospheric tension, and narrative precision created advertisements that felt cinematic and immersive. Fincher's work emphasized mood, character, and visual storytelling over overt product placement. Viewers were drawn into worlds that were both compelling and memorable, ensuring that brand associations were embedded within a narrative framework that resonated emotionally and cognitively. The focus was on immersion and recall, demonstrating that brevity need not compromise depth or sophistication. The infusion of cinematic expertise transformed the production values and expectations for all Super Bowl advertising. Budgets skyrocketed, not only for airtime, but for concept development, filming, and post-production. Advertisers recognized that they were competing for attention on a scale similar to that of major motion pictures. Directors brought expertise in visual composition, narrative pacing, and character development, crafting micronarratives that could stand on their own while simultaneously reinforcing brand identity. The 30-second spot became a laboratory for cinematic innovation, where every frame was carefully considered for maximum emotional and cognitive impact. Cinematic techniques also allowed for greater emotional engagement. Lighting, color, sound design, and camera movement were used deliberately to evoke specific responses from viewers. Slow-motion sequences heightened drama. Close-ups emphasized vulnerability or triumph. Music and sound effects created tension, humor, or awe. These elements combined to create immersive experiences, anchoring the viewer's attention and reinforcing memory retention. The result was a commercial that transcended simple persuasion and entered the realm of storytelling, where the narrative became inseparable from the product. Directors' involvement also signaled a shift in the cultural perception of Super Bowl advertising. The best commercials were no longer ephemeral interruptions. They were events, mini-cinematic experiences that audiences anticipated with the same excitement as the game itself. The participation of renowned directors lent legitimacy to the medium, suggesting that advertising could be a form of high art as well as a marketing tool. Viewers began to judge campaigns by narrative, style, and execution rather than mere clarity of message. The benchmark for success now included cinematic impact, emotional resonance, and cultural relevance. This cinematic revolution also elevated the competitive stakes among brands. Advertisers sought to distinguish themselves not only through humor or emotional appeal, but through visual, storytelling, and directorial craftsmanship. The collaboration between brand strategists and filmmakers became essential. Concepts were developed with narrative arcs, character development, and visual motifs in mind. Storyboards and animatics were treated with the same seriousness as a feature film. Every camera angle, lighting choice, and line of dialogue was scrutinized for its ability to convey story, emotion, and brand identity in the tight confines of the Super Bowl broadcast. The influence of Hollywood directors extended beyond individual commercials to shape broader industry trends. As audiences became accustomed to cinematic quality, its expectations for visual sophistication and narrative depth increased across the board. Brands that could not match the production values or storytelling ambition risked appearing amateurish. The cinematic standard became a cultural baseline, shaping how viewers experienced advertising and how marketers approached creative strategy. The 30-second spot evolved from a simple pitch into a high-stakes narrative experiment. Directors' contributions also reinforced the psychological mechanisms that underpin effective advertising. By creating immersive, emotionally resonant narratives, commercials engage the brain's attentional, emotional, and memory systems. Visual storytelling activated the visual cortex. Narrative arcs engaged cognitive frameworks for understanding events. And emotional cues reinforced consolidation in memory networks. Humor, suspense, and awe were deployed strategically to enhance retention and recall. In essence, cinematic craftsmanship was leveraged as a tool for both entertainment and influence, merging artistry with marketing efficacy. The success of this cinematic approach is evident in enduring cultural impact. Ads directed by Scott, Bay, and Fincher are still referenced, discussed, and analyzed decades later. Their work demonstrates that advertising can be a form of storytelling that transcends commercial objectives, creating shared cultural moments and contributing to collective memory. These directors elevated the 30-second spot into a genre of storytelling that demands attention, engagement, and emotional investment. The audience responded by remembering the narrative, the visual spectacle, and the associated brand long after the broadcast ended. The director's game also influenced production practices across the industry. Other filmmakers, production companies, and advertising agencies adapted Hollywood techniques for broader campaigns, raising the overall quality and ambition of Super Bowl advertising. The competition for creative distinction became a driving force behind innovation, compelling brands to explore new storytelling methods, visual effects, and emotional strategies. The 30-second slot transformed into a crucible for creative experimentation, producing a body of work that is as studied for its artistry as for its marketing effectiveness. Ultimately, the cinematic revolution demonstrated that the power of advertising lies not only in information delivery, but in the ability to craft experience. Directors brought mastery of narrative, visual composition, and emotional engagement to the medium, turning commercials into short films capable of captivating millions simultaneously. They established the Super Bowl as a stage where storytelling, artistry, and marketing converge, creating cultural moments that endure and shaping audience expectations for what an advertisement can accomplish. Through the lens of Hollywood craftsmanship, the Super Bowl spot became a benchmark for narrative, visual, and emotional sophistication. directors transformed a simple marketing challenge into a form of cultural expression, ensuring that commercials could be remembered, discussed, and celebrated as standalone achievements. Their work reinforced the notion that the Super Bowl is not just a game, but a platform for the intersection of commerce, culture, and storytelling. Every frame, shot, and sequence became a carefully orchestrated instrument of memory and influence. The legacy of this era is enduring. The principles established by directors continue to inform contemporary advertising strategy. Visual storytelling, cinematic technique, emotional resonance, and narrative cohesion remain central to the craft of Super Bowl advertising. The 30-second spot is no longer a simple interruption. It is a story, an experience, and a cultural event. Directors transformed the medium, setting the standard for creativity, emotional engagement, and memorability that continues to define the Super Bowl today. In the mid-2000s, a new strategy emerged among Super Bowl advertisers, one that relied less on spectacle and more on memory. Brands discovered that nostalgia was a powerful tool, capable of bypassing rational evaluation and directly engaging emotional circuits. Consumers remembered moments from their childhood, their youth, and the simpler times of the past, and advertisers realized that linking products to these memories could generate trust, loyalty, and cultural resonance. Nostalgia became a weapon in the marketing arsenal, a means of connecting with audiences on a deeply personal level while simultaneously reinforcing brand identity. The mechanism is simple but profoundly effective. Human memory is selective, often idealizing the past and amplifying positive emotions associated with earlier experiences. By evoking these memories through familiar icons, music, slogans, or imagery, advertisers created an emotional shortcut that bypassed skepticism. Viewers were not merely being sold a product. They were being invited to relive moments of joy, innocence, or cultural significance. Nostalgic commercials tapped into universal experiences, drawing on shared cultural references to generate a sense of belonging and continuity. One of the earliest examples of nostalgia-driven Super Bowl advertising was Coca-Cola's revival of the Mean Joe Greene campaign decades after its original debut. The original commercial, featuring Greene and a young fan exchanging a jersey for a Coke, had left a deep imprint on viewers. By revisiting this story, brands were able to trigger associative memory and emotional resonance simultaneously. Adults who had seen the original as children or young adults experienced a powerful sense of continuity, while younger viewers encountered the story for the first time within a context that signaled cultural importance. The result was an advertisement that bridged generations, leveraging nostalgia to create both familiarity and emotional impact. Nostalgia in advertising is not limited to characters or storylines. Brands began to reference past styles, music, and cultural trends. Visual cues such as retro fonts, vintage color palettes, and familiar cinematic techniques activated long-term memory networks. Music from previous decades, jingles, or soundtracks associated with formative experiences became auditory anchors that reinforced recall. These cues were carefully calibrated to ensure that they evoked the intended emotional response without alienating younger audiences unfamiliar with the references. The balance was delicate. The advertisement had to resonate across demographic boundaries while maintaining authenticity. Emotional callbacks also extend to broader cultural or societal touchstones. Super Bowl commercials leveraged events, trends, and shared experiences that defined the childhood or adolescence of target demographics. A commercial featuring a classic toy, a popular television program, or a shared sporting memory could evoke a profound sense of connection and belonging. These campaigns relied on collective memory, the understanding that certain cultural symbols carry emotional weight beyond the individual. By aligning a product with these symbols, advertisers amplified both memorability and perceived significance. Brands also understood the cognitive principles that underlie nostalgia. Memory is often reconstructive rather than literal, meaning that individuals fill in gaps and idealize the past. Advertisers exploit this tendency by presenting simplified, emotionally charged representations of historical moments. The audience is complicit in the reconstruction, filling in details with their own memories and emotions. This dynamic strengthens the bond between viewer and brand because it becomes a co-created experience. Consumers feel that the brand understands and validates their personal and cultural history. The strategy of selling nostalgia extended beyond revival campaigns. Iconic characters, mascots, and spokespersons were brought back to re-establish continuity and trust. The return of a beloved celebrity or fictional figure created immediate recognition and credibility. The emotional impact was magnified by the audience's familiarity with the figure, generating both delight and trust. A 30-second commercial could achieve an extraordinary degree of connection by tapping into pre-existing associations, reducing the cognitive effort required to engage and remember. Nostalgia also provided a safe space for experimentation, because the emotional foundation was established in memory. Advertisers could take creative risks with narrative, style, or humor. Audiences were more willing to tolerate or even embrace unconventional presentation when the content evoked positive associations from the past. This allowed brands to push boundaries in storytelling while maintaining the comfort of familiarity. The interplay between novelty and memory created a heightened engagement that traditional campaigns could rarely achieve. The social dimension of nostalgia further amplifies its effectiveness. Nostalgic advertisements become topics of conversation, often prompting viewers to share personal memories or cultural commentary. Social reinforcement ensures that the emotional and cognitive impact is extended beyond the initial broadcast. Viral sharing, commentary on blogs, and discussion on social media contribute to a feedback loop that strengthens memory retention, enhances brand visibility, and embeds the commercial into collective cultural consciousness. The nostalgia is no longer individual. It becomes a shared cultural experience. From a marketing perspective, nostalgia is also a tool for differentiating brands in a crowded field. Super Bowl advertising is highly competitive, with dozens of major campaigns vying for attention. By evoking emotional and cultural touchstones, brands could stand out amidst visual spectacle, humor, and shock tactics. Nostalgia offered a pathway to engagement that was emotionally rich, cognitively reinforcing, and culturally resonant. A well-executed nostalgic campaign could achieve both immediate impact and enduring memorability, often exceeding the effectiveness of more conventional advertising techniques. The use of nostalgia demonstrates the sophistication of modern advertising strategy. It is not merely sentimentality. It is a deliberate application of psychological principles, cultural literacy, and narrative craft. By understanding memory, emotion, and social reinforcement, advertisers can craft campaigns that resonate on multiple levels. Viewers are simultaneously entertained, emotionally engaged, and subtly guided toward positive associations with the brand. The nostalgia functions as both emotional hook and mnemonic device, ensuring that the advertisement occupies space in memory well beyond the game itself. Nostalgia also intersects with identity. Brands tap into the audience's sense of self and history, positioning themselves as custodians of cultural memory. Consumers come to associate positive memories and personal experiences with the brand itself. This association strengthens loyalty and amplifies influence, creating a sense that the brand is part of the individual's life story. Super Bowl advertising, by integrating nostalgia into its narrative, transforms commercial messages into personal and collective experience. The strategy is evident in campaigns across multiple industries, from beverages to automotive, entertainment to technology. Brands have leveraged historical references, returning icons, and cultural callbacks to achieve both memorability and emotional impact. The sophistication lies in execution, selecting references that are culturally resonant, emotionally evocative, and narratively compelling. The goal is not merely to remind, but to immerse, to create an experience that feels both familiar and emotionally rewarding. Ultimately, selling nostalgia represents the intersection of memory, emotion, and commerce. Super Bowl advertisers understood that attention alone was insufficient. Emotional engagement, cultural resonance, and memory reinforcement were essential. Nostalgia provided a bridge between past and present, individual and collective, entertainment and commerce. By weaponizing memory, brands transformed fleeting moments into enduring cultural artifacts. 30 seconds became an opportunity to create experiences that transcended product placement, embedding the brand into the emotional and social fabric of American life. Through nostalgia, Super Bowl commercials achieved a remarkable synthesis. They entertained, they engaged, and they endured. By drawing on memory and emotion, advertisers crafted campaigns that were remembered far longer than the game itself, demonstrating the power of human connection, cultural resonance, and strategic storytelling. The 30-second spot became a vehicle for shared experience, a repository of collective memory, and a testament to the enduring influence of emotion on perception and recall. The Super Bowl has always been a shared experience, a collective moment where millions of viewers gather to witness the spectacle of sport and the creativity of advertising. For decades, the broadcast itself defined the rhythm of anticipation, and the commercials were experienced in real time, their impact dependent on immediate attention and word of mouth. Then, in the mid-2000s, the media landscape shifted. Platforms like YouTube, Twitter, and later TikTok transformed the way audiences engaged with Super Bowl advertisements. The game remained a central event, but the conversation, the cultural resonance, and the life of the commercials themselves began to exist independently of the broadcast. Advertisements could now go viral, reaching millions before kickoff, circulating endlessly after the final whistle, and redefining the metrics of success. YouTube played a pivotal role in this transformation. Brands began uploading their commercials online in advance of the Super Bowl, allowing audiences to watch, share, and react days or even weeks before the game. This strategy shifted the focus from a single broadcast moment to a broader cultural event. The 30-second spot was no longer ephemeral. It became part of a continuous dialogue, a piece of content that could be dissected, praised, parodied, and remixed. Early examples of pre-release campaigns demonstrated that anticipation could amplify impact, creating buzz that carried into the stadiums, living rooms, and social feeds of viewers across the country. The commercial became a story unto itself, separate from the outcome of the game. Twitter added another layer to this evolving dynamic. The platform transformed Super Bowl advertising into a real-time conversation. Fans live-tweeted reactions, memes circulated instantly, and advertisers monitored the pulse of audience engagement as the commercials aired. Virality was no longer a byproduct of the game. It became a measurable outcome. The speed of dissemination meant that cultural resonance could be immediate. A clever joke, a surprising celebrity cameo, or a provocative narrative could spark thousands of interactions within seconds. Social media extended the lifespan of advertisements, ensuring that discussion and memory were no longer confined to a 30-second window during the broadcast. TikTok, emerging later, introduced yet another dimension. Short-form video, remix culture, and algorithmic amplification allowed Super Bowl advertisements to be reinterpreted, recreated, and shared in ways previously unimaginable. Fans could participate in challenges, reenact scenes, or overlay personal commentary, transforming passive viewers into active participants. This participatory engagement enhanced memorability and emotional connection. A single advertisement could become the basis for thousands of derivative works, expanding its cultural footprint far beyond traditional broadcasting channels. The commercial became both content and catalyst, sparking creativity and dialogue across a global audience. The shift to social media also changed the metrics of success. Whereas traditional evaluation focused on immediate recall, brand awareness, or sales lift, the digital age introduced views, shares, likes, and engagement as critical indicators. Virality became a goal in itself, a commercial that generated millions of impressions online before, during, and after the game was considered more successful than one that performed well only within the confines of the broadcast. Advertisers and agencies adapted strategies accordingly, emphasizing shareable content, emotional hooks, and cultural relevance that would thrive in online ecosystems. Success was measured not just by visibility, but by cultural penetration and digital conversation. This transition also affected creative decisions. Advertisements were increasingly designed with dual contexts in mind: the live television audience and the digital audience. Humor, narrative complexity, and visual spectacle were crafted to resonate in both environments. Memorable phrases, striking imagery, and celebrity involvement were optimized for shareability, ensuring that even viewers watching outside the broadcast could participate in the cultural moment. The social media shift demanded a broader understanding of audience behavior, attention patterns, and content virality. Creative teams considered not just the ad itself, but the ecosystem in which it would circulate. Social amplification introduced an element of unpredictability. Unlike the controlled environment of a broadcast, online engagement is decentralized and dynamic. Audiences could elevate certain elements, critique others, or remix content in ways unanticipated by advertisers. This democratization of influence meant that cultural impact was co-created. Brands could no longer dictate reception entirely. They became participants in an ongoing conversation. The success of a Super Bowl ad was increasingly determined by how effectively it could engage audiences across multiple platforms, generating buzz, conversation, and shared memory. The social media shift also reinforced the principles of memory and emotion previously exploited in traditional advertising. Humor, surprise, emotional resonance, and narrative coherence continued to drive recall. But these elements now had amplification mechanisms. A particularly clever or touching advertisement could circulate repeatedly, allowing repeated exposure that strengthened memory consolidation. Audiences encountered the commercial in multiple contexts, sometimes months after the initial broadcast, reinforcing cultural familiarity and extending brand impact. Memory was no longer bounded by a single event. It became a rolling, evolving process shaped by social networks and shared experience. In this new era, anticipation and pre-release strategy became as important as the creative content itself. Brands began teasing campaigns with trailers, behind-the-scenes footage, and interactive online content, building audience engagement before the game even started. The Super Bowl became a platform for narrative unfolding, with commercials acting as episodic installments in larger marketing arcs. Fans eagerly awaited these releases, creating a sense of ritualized engagement akin to following a television series or cinematic franchise. The anticipation itself became part of the emotional hook, reinforcing attention and memorability. Social media also enhanced cross-generational and global impact. Traditional broadcasts were primarily national, constrained by time zones and channel availability. Online platforms extended reach to international audiences, younger demographics, and viewers who might not otherwise engage with football. The cultural footprint of the Super Bowl advertisement expanded far beyond the stadiums and living rooms of America, creating a global conversation that spanned continents and cultures. The virality of content meant that memorable spots could become part of the collective consciousness worldwide, further reinforcing the game's position as a stage for cultural rather than purely athletic spectacle. Brands began to understand that engagement, metrics, and viral potential were as significant as creative execution. Advertisements were crafted to maximize social interaction, combining narrative, emotion, and shareable moments with hashtags, interactive elements, and user-generated content opportunities. The goal was no longer only to capture attention during the broadcast, but to sustain discussion, replay, and emotional resonance in the digital sphere. Social media transformed the Super Bowl ad into a living entity, capable of evolving, interacting, and persisting far beyond the 30-second window of traditional airtime. The social media shift also introduced new pressures and competition. Brands now competed not only against each other in the broadcast schedule, but across multiple digital channels. vying for visibility, engagement, and cultural relevance. Success required anticipation, creativity, and adaptability. Advertisers needed to understand platform-specific behaviors, the mechanics of viral dissemination, and the emotional triggers that would drive engagement in online communities. The 30-second spot became part of a multi-platform strategy, integrated into a broader ecosystem of brand storytelling and audience interaction. Ultimately, social media transformed the Super Bowl from a single broadcast into a multi-layered cultural phenomenon. Advertising moved from a static, one-time event to a dynamic, participatory, and enduring experience. Viral pre-release campaigns, live engagement, and post-game discussion created a continuous rhythm of cultural participation. The 30-second spot became a nexus of attention, emotion, and social interaction, extending memory, reinforcing brand identity, and reshaping the cultural significance of the event itself. The Super Bowl is no longer merely a game. It is a platform where commerce, culture, and community converge, amplified by the networks and behaviors of the digital age. As the Super Bowl evolved into a cultural institution, the advertisements themselves became more than marketing tools. They became statements of identity, morality, and social positioning. By the 2010s, brands recognized that the stakes extended beyond product awareness or entertainment value. Audiences were increasingly attentive to values, beliefs, and social responsibility. The commercial had become a stage for ethical expression, for aligning a product with an ideology, a community, or a moral stance. Companies were no longer selling only goods. They were selling identity, and the Super Bowl, with its unparalleled reach, offered the perfect stage. Brands began taking explicit positions on social and political issues, from gender equality to environmental responsibility, racial justice to inclusivity. Some campaigns celebrated diversity and empowerment, spotlighting athletes, families, or individuals whose stories challenged norms. Others highlighted sustainability initiatives, technological ethics, or charitable commitments. The intention was clear: by staking a moral or social claim, brands could resonate with audiences on a level that transcended transactional marketing. Loyalty, they understood, was increasingly shaped by alignment of values rather than price or utility alone. The first notable wave of identity-driven Super Bowl advertising demonstrated both potential and peril. A single misstep could ignite backlash and generate national controversy. Some campaigns were accused of inauthenticity or opportunism, undermining the very trust they sought to cultivate. Social media amplified both praise and criticism, creating an environment in which cultural reception was immediate, relentless, and impossible to control entirely. The stakes were higher than ever. A 30-second spot could generate millions of impressions, both positive and negative, in a matter of hours. Advertisers had to balance creative ambition with cultural sensitivity, authenticity, and narrative clarity. One emblematic example involved a campaign highlighting female empowerment and workplace equality. The advertisement featured women in positions of authority and influence, celebrating achievements historically marginalized in media narratives. Viewers responded with enthusiasm, sharing clips, commentary, and praise online. However, criticism quickly followed, questioning whether the sponsoring brand's internal practices aligned with the message. The commercial became a lightning rod, sparking conversation not only about its narrative, but about the integrity of the company itself. The episode illustrated a fundamental truth of identity-driven advertising. The message and the messenger are inseparable. Authenticity is not optional, it is essential. Similarly, campaigns emphasizing racial or cultural representation drew attention to the responsibilities and opportunities of brands. Operating on a national stage, audiences expected more than symbolic gestures. They scrutinized casting, storytelling, and contextual accuracy. Misalignment between messaging and perceived reality led to criticism, while careful attention to nuance, depth, and respect could generate widespread approval and lasting cultural impact. Super Bowl commercials became forums for negotiating cultural narratives, where brands could influence dialogue but were also subject to immediate evaluation by millions of socially attuned viewers. The era of brands taking sides also transformed creative strategy. Advertisers needed to understand not only marketing psychology, but also social trends, historical context, and audience perception. Creative teams incorporated research on public sentiment, cultural movements, and demographic analysis to ensure that campaigns resonated meaningfully. Narrative arcs were designed to align product identity with broader societal narratives, creating emotional connections that were both personal and collective. Humor, storytelling, and spectacle remained tools, but they were deployed in service of a larger ideological or ethical claim. The risk and reward dynamic in identity-driven advertising was heightened by the viral nature of social media. Praise and condemnation spread rapidly, with retweets, shares, and posts shaping the trajectory of public reception. A campaign that successfully balanced authenticity, creativity, and social resonance could dominate cultural conversation, reinforcing both brand loyalty and relevance. Conversely, a miscalculation could result in sustained negative attention, potentially damaging both reputation and consumer trust. The Super Bowl became a crucible in which commercial ambition, cultural literacy, and ethical positioning were simultaneously tested. Brands also began leveraging identity-driven campaigns to engage younger demographics, particularly millennials and Generation Z. These audiences demonstrated a heightened sensitivity to social responsibility, equity, and inclusivity. Advertising that reflected these values resonated with their sense of personal and collective identity. A commercial was not merely entertainment. It was an affirmation that a company understood, represented, and aligned with the ethical frameworks of its audience. The 30-second spot became a vehicle for relationship building, trust cultivation, and long-term brand engagement. The adoption of social stances also reflected a broader cultural shift in marketing philosophy. The era of pure persuasion, of product-centric messaging, was giving way to a model in which brands communicated principles, ideals, and vision. The Super Bowl, with its vast, diverse audience and high visibility, provided an unparalleled platform. Advertisers recognized that in a fragmented media landscape, where attention is a scarce commodity, aligning a product with social meaning could amplify engagement, generate discourse, and produce long-term cultural relevance. Yet the era was not without tension. Balancing advocacy with entertainment required nuance. Audiences responded poorly to overt, moralizing, preachiness, or inauthenticity. The most successful campaigns integrated social commentary seamlessly into storytelling, creating narratives that entertained, inspired, and provoked thought without alienating viewers. Humor, irony, and subtlety became essential tools for embedding identity-driven messages within the compact narrative architecture of a 30-second commercial. The aim was to inform and persuade while preserving engagement, memorability, and emotional resonance. The phenomenon also highlighted the evolving nature of public accountability. Unlike earlier decades, where reception was mediated by broadcast metrics and delayed analysis, identity-driven campaigns faced instantaneous evaluation. Tweets, posts, and video reactions created a constant feedback loop, providing advertisers with real-time insight into audience perception. This immediacy heightened stakes and required careful orchestration of narrative, visual, and ethical elements. Success depended not only on creative brilliance, but on strategic insight into social psychology, cultural trends, and the mechanisms of viral discourse. Ultimately, the era of brands taking sides demonstrated that Super Bowl advertising had matured into a multidimensional cultural platform. The 30-second spot was no longer merely an interruption of sport. It was a locus for social dialogue, a vehicle for identity expression, and a catalyst for public discourse. Brands navigated a complex interplay of ethics, emotion, and spectacle, understanding that the power of advertising extended beyond immediate awareness to influence perceptions, shape conversation, and embed themselves into the cultural fabric. By staking moral and ideological positions, brands transform the Super Bowl commercial into an instrument of cultural engagement. Success required authenticity, narrative sophistication, and an acute understanding of audience values. Failure risked controversy, backlash, and reputational damage. The commercial became both message and mirror, reflecting the priorities, tensions, and aspirations of contemporary society. Advertising had evolved from persuasion into performance, from promotion into cultural participation, and from entertainment into identity-driven discourse. In this environment, every commercial was a calculated negotiation between brand, audience, and society. The stakes extended beyond sales, transcending entertainment into realms of moral authority, cultural relevance, and public conversation. The Super Bowl became a stage where brands could assert influence, test cultural alignment, and participate in shaping national dialogue. 30 seconds of airtime carried profound implications, illustrating the remarkable evolution of advertising into a medium capable of sparking reflection, emotion, and debate. Beneath the glitz and spectacle of the Super Bowl. Beyond the spectacle of cinematic storytelling, celebrity cameos, and viral humor, exists a meticulously constructed machine. The advertisements that dominate the broadcast are not spontaneous bursts of creativity. They are the product of industrial precision, of teams of experts working to quantify and predict human behavior with extraordinary accuracy. Behind each 30-second spot is a collaboration of ad agencies, behavioral psychologists, data analysts, and marketing strategists, all orchestrated to manipulate attention, emotion, and memory with near scientific rigor. The process begins long before the camera rolls. Creative teams spend months analyzing audience demographics, cultural trends, and consumer behavior. Market research identifies target segments, their desires, anxieties, and aspirational identities. Data scientists mine enormous troves of information, examining past campaign performance, social media engagement, purchasing patterns, and even neurological responses to stimuli. The goal is to understand not only what viewers will notice, but what they will remember. What will provoke laughter, empathy, or awe, and what will create a subconscious bond between the audience and the brand. Behavioral psychologists are enlisted to interpret these findings through the lens of human cognition. They study the ways in which memory is encoded, how repetition strengthens recall, and how emotion amplifies impact. Advertisements are carefully designed to leverage these principles. A humorous punchline, a fleeting emotional beat, a visual cue that evokes nostalgia element is intentionally constructed to optimize memorability. The 30-second spot becomes a laboratory experiment, testing the limits of attention, emotional engagement, and persuasion. Ad agencies coordinate the synthesis of these elements into coherent narratives. Directors, cinematographers, and editors translate abstract data and psychological insight into visual and auditory storytelling. Every frame, every sound, every pause is analyzed for its effect on the audience. Timing is calibrated to the millisecond, ensuring that humor lands precisely, that suspense builds and resolves, and that emotional cues trigger the intended neurological response. The commercial becomes a miniature performance of engineering and artistry, where creativity is guided by data and every decision is justified by its potential impact. The industrialization of persuasion also extends to pre-testing and refinement. Focus groups, test screenings, and online previews generate immediate feedback. Viewers' responses are measured not only for comprehension or enjoyment, but for emotional resonance, recall accuracy, and likelihood of sharing. Eye-tracking, facial coding, and biometric monitoring reveal micro-level reactions that inform final edits. Even small adjustments to pacing, music, or dialogue can dramatically alter effectiveness. The process is iterative, data-driven, and relentlessly focused on optimizing every aspect of engagement. Budgetary scale is another indicator of the industrial nature of the system. Super Bowl advertisements are not casual productions. They are high-stakes investments. The cost of a 30-second spot, often exceeding $7 million, is accompanied by multi-million-dollar production budgets. Brands treat these campaigns as corporate events rather than simple marketing efforts. The financial stakes demand accountability, measurement, and precise planning. Failure is not merely disappointing. It is expensive and potentially damaging to brand perception. The industrial process of creation reflects the magnitude of the investment, combining artistry with strategic discipline. Agencies also operate within a competitive ecosystem where success is relative. Super Bowl advertisements are rarely assessed in isolation. Each spot competes not only for attention during the broadcast, but for social media traction, viral potential, and cultural resonance. Analysts study trends, engagement patterns, and audience sentiment to evaluate which elements contribute to success. Campaigns are dissected, benchmarked, and analyzed to inform future iterations. The hidden machine extends across years and multiple brands, continuously refining strategies based on cumulative experience. The influence of behavioral science in this process cannot be overstated. Concepts like emotional contagion, scarcity, social proof, and narrative transportation are deliberately employed to shape viewer perception. Commercials are constructed to elicit specific neurological responses, leveraging cognitive biases that dictate how people interpret and remember information. Humor triggers dopamine. Emotional storytelling engages mirror neurons. Suspense creates a temporary elevation of attention and physiological arousal. Every element of design is informed by understanding of how the brain processes information, how attention is allocated, and how memory is encoded. This machine also shapes cultural conversation. Advertisements are no longer intended solely to promote products. They are designed to generate discussion, to become shared experiences that permeate social networks and media coverage. Anticipation, surprise, humor, and emotion are crafted not only for individual impact, but for communal amplification. The effectiveness of a campaign is measured in cultural penetration, in the extent to which it is referenced, mimicked, or remixed in the public sphere. The hidden machine operates not only in the creation of content, but in the orchestration of its reception and propagation. The precision of the process highlights the intersection of art and science. Creativity is guided by empirical observation and predictive modeling, producing outcomes that are both aesthetically compelling and strategically effective. Directors, writers, and designers are not free to experiment arbitrarily. Their decisions are constrained and informed by research, testing, and measurable objectives. The narrative is crafted to optimize engagement, the visuals to maximize recall, and the emotional beats to produce lasting resonance. The commercial becomes a symphony of human insight, technological analysis, and artistic expression. The industrialization of persuasion also reflects a broader evolution in marketing philosophy. Brands have moved from selling features to selling experiences, identities, and emotional states. Super Bowl advertisements are not simply messages. They are engineered encounters designed to shape perception, influence behavior, and embed themselves into memory. The audience's response is meticulously anticipated and analyzed, creating a feedback loop in which attention, emotion, and cognition are leveraged to produce measurable outcomes. Ultimately, the hidden machine reveals the true sophistication of modern advertising. What appears as a fleeting, entertaining interruption during a game is, in fact, the result of months of preparation, interdisciplinary collaboration, and precision execution. It is a testament to the convergence of data, psychology, and creative storytelling. The 30-second spot is both a product and a process, an artifact of industrial ingenuity designed to captivate, persuade, and endure. Super Bowl advertisements are not merely marketing. They are carefully constructed cultural instruments, engineered to resonate in the hearts and minds of millions while shaping collective memory and conversation. The Super Bowl, through these ads, has become a laboratory for human emotion and cognition. Every frame, Every line and every beat is a calculated effort to optimize attention, memory, and engagement. The audience, often unaware of the precision behind the spectacle, experiences the commercials as entertainment, as art, as culture. Behind the surface lies an intricate machine where science and creativity converge, shaping the cultural and emotional significance of each advertisement. These are 30 seconds of orchestrated influence, a testament to the power of design, insight, and the hidden architecture of persuasion. For decades, the Super Bowl has been the stage where athletes are celebrated for physical prowess, tactical intelligence, and competitive spirit. Yet beyond the roar of the crowd, the players' own narratives have been shaped by forces far larger than the game itself. Super Bowl advertising created an opportunity, not just for brands, but for athletes to cultivate public identities, influence perception, and extend their careers beyond the field. From Joe Namath striding confidently into the limelight to Tom Brady navigating the complex interplay of celebrity and commercial partnerships, the athlete became inseparable from the marketing spectacle. Joe Namath's early forays into commercial work illustrate the beginning of this evolution. By the late 1960s, Namath's charisma, swagger, and fame transcended the statistics of his career. Brands recognized that his persona carried persuasive power. He was not merely endorsing a product. He was embodying a lifestyle, a sense of confidence, and a cultural ideal. The commercials he participated in presented Namath as both a champion on the field and a figure of aspirational identity off it. These campaigns began the tradition of athlete branding, where the public's affection for a player could translate into tangible engagement with products and companies. The rise of athlete endorsements created a symbiotic relationship between sports and commerce. Players gained income, exposure, and the ability to craft a personal brand, while companies leveraged their credibility, charisma, and fame to sell products. Super Bowl advertising amplified this effect, providing the highest visibility platform in American culture. The 30-second spot offered a concentrated showcase for athletes to become cultural icons, often in ways that surpassed the memorability of their actual on-field achievements. The intersection of personal narrative and brand messaging became a defining feature of the Super Bowl era. As advertising grew more sophisticated, athletes were increasingly integrated into narrative campaigns. They were not just endorsers, but storytellers, participants in cinematic storytelling designed to evoke emotion, humor, or admiration. Commercials featuring sports figures often positioned them as role models, as embodiments of perseverance, triumph, and authenticity. These portrayals reinforced cultural ideals of heroism, while simultaneously linking those ideals to products and experiences. The player's persona became an instrument through which audiences experienced both admiration and emotional resonance, with each endorsement shaping public perception of their character as much as their athletic performance. Tom Brady represents a modern iteration of this dynamic. His career, marked by precision, competitiveness, and longevity, was complemented by a deliberate approach to commercial partnerships. Unlike early athletes, whose endorsements were primarily transactional, Brady exercised greater narrative control over the way his image was deployed. Advertisements featuring him were carefully curated to align with his personal brand, emphasizing discipline, excellence, and a relatable, aspirational ethos. This strategic approach illustrates how contemporary athletes navigate the dual pressures of performance and persona, recognizing the cultural and economic power of the Super Bowl platform. The integration of athletes into advertising campaigns also reflects broader trends in celebrity culture. Sports figures are no longer confined to the locker room or the stadium. They occupy a prominent role in popular consciousness. Their faces and voices carry authority, emotional resonance, and aspirational weight. For brands, this offers an opportunity to associate products with cultural influence, trust, and admiration. For athletes, it provides a vehicle for extending career longevity, cultivating legacy, and participating in cultural conversations that extend beyond the temporal boundaries of a single season or game. Athletes' participation in advertising has not been without complexity. The intertwining of commerce and personal identity requires careful navigation of public perception. Misalignment between an athlete's image and the product they endorse can provoke backlash, diminish credibility, or undermine cultural influence. Similarly, the expectations of authenticity and relatability create pressures for athletes to manage narrative carefully. Success depends not only on on-field performance, but on the consistency, coherence, and appeal of the persona conveyed in commercials. Public appearances and social media presence. The Super Bowl, with its unparalleled viewership and cultural significance, magnifies these dynamics. Athletes participating in commercials reach audiences that extend far beyond traditional sports fans. They become part of the national conversation, symbols of both achievement and aspiration. Their involvement transforms the advertisement from a mere marketing message into a shared cultural experience, where viewers engage not only with the product, but with the identity, story, and values embodied by the athlete. Beyond endorsements, the Super Bowl provides athletes with a rare opportunity for narrative agency. Some players have leveraged their visibility to challenge stereotypes, address social issues, or highlight personal journeys. Advertisements can serve as platforms for expression, humanizing figures often perceived solely through the lens of performance metrics. The athlete's story becomes inseparable from the brand narrative, offering audiences a multidimensional understanding of character, motivation, and achievement. In this sense, Super Bowl commercials operate as both promotional tools and cultural storytelling devices, shaping public perception while reinforcing brand messaging. This intersection of sport, identity, and advertising also illuminates the broader mechanisms of cultural memory. Fans may recall a quarterback's decisive touchdown with admiration, but they often remember the moment they saw that athlete smiling in a commercial, interacting with children, or performing an act of humor or humanity. The player becomes not only a hero in the record books, but a cultural symbol whose image persists in collective memory. Super Bowl commercials extend the temporal reach of athletic legacy, embedding the player's persona in ways that surpass statistics and game outcomes. Athletes themselves recognize the strategic value of this visibility. Careers are finite, but brand relationships, personal image, and cultural relevance can endure indefinitely. By participating in Super Bowl campaigns, players establish associations that persist beyond retirement, shaping opportunities in media, business, and public life. The advertisement functions as a bridge, connecting professional achievement with personal narrative, cultural influence, and enduring recognition. The 30-second spot becomes a form of legacy, preserving identity and amplifying presence in the cultural landscape. The economic dimension is equally compelling. Endorsements tied to the Super Bowl can yield returns that rival or exceed salaries, creating new revenue streams and financial security. These partnerships require negotiation, strategic alignment, and careful management of public perception. Athletes must balance commercial interests with integrity, cultural relevance, and personal branding objectives. The stakes are high, but the rewards, when executed effectively, extend well beyond the field. Super Bowl advertising represents both opportunity and responsibility, a high-profile arena where personal and cultural narratives converge. Ultimately, examining the player's perspective reveals the dual function of Super Bowl advertising. It is at once a commercial mechanism and a vehicle for identity construction. Athletes gain visibility, influence, and economic benefit while contributing to cultural storytelling that shapes audience perception. Brands gain authority, credibility, and emotional resonance through alignment with admired figures. The relationship is mutually reinforcing, dependent on skillful navigation of narrative, authenticity, and cultural dynamics. The 30-second spot is a nexus where sport, culture, and commerce intersect, producing both immediate engagement and enduring legacy. In this context, the Super Bowl is not only a stage for athletic excellence, but a platform for cultural curation. Players are active participants in shaping how the audience experiences, interprets, and remembers both the game and the broader spectacle surrounding it. Commercials become extensions of the athlete's identity, intertwined with personal history, public perception, and cultural narrative. The synergy between player and advertisement exemplifies the complex interplay of fame, commerce, and storytelling that defines the modern Super Bowl experience. From Joe Namath's early swagger to Tom Brady's carefully managed persona, the trajectory of athlete involvement in advertising illustrates a broader evolution. The player is no longer merely a performer of athletic skill, but a collaborator in the construction of cultural meaning, emotional engagement, and brand identity. Super Bowl commercials magnify this influence, offering visibility, narrative authority, and enduring presence in public memory. Athletes have become both participants and architects in the cultural phenomenon of advertising, demonstrating the profound and lasting impact of these fleeting 30-second moments. The Super Bowl has long been America's preeminent sporting event, a cultural touchstone that commands the attention of millions of viewers nationwide. Yet in the 21st century, the scope of its influence has expanded far beyond domestic borders. Through satellite feeds, streaming platforms, and global media partnerships, the Super Bowl transformed from a national spectacle into a worldwide phenomenon. This shift altered not only how the game is consumed, but how its advertising is produced, marketed, and perceived. What was once a distinctly American celebration of sport became a global stage, where brands compete for attention across continents, cultures, and digital platforms. The early signs of globalization were subtle. Networks like ESPN International and NBC Universal began to sell broadcasting rights overseas, introducing the Super Bowl to audiences in Europe, Asia, and Latin America. Initially, the reception varied. Some viewers were drawn to the sheer spectacle of the event. Others struggled to connect with a sport rooted in American cultural traditions. Advertisers soon recognized the potential of reaching these untapped markets. American brands that previously focused solely on domestic consumers began crafting campaigns with international resonance, creating narratives that could translate across languages, cultural norms, and social contexts. Streaming platforms accelerated this process dramatically. Services like YouTube, Hulu, and NFL Game Pass enabled real-time access to the Super Bowl for audiences in countries that might otherwise have had to wait days or weeks for highlights. Social media integration, particularly Twitter and Instagram, allowed viewers to comment, share, and create content around the game and its commercials. The immediate global circulation of 30-second spots created new pressures and opportunities. Advertisers were no longer speaking solely to a domestic audience. They were crafting messages that could withstand cross-cultural scrutiny, provoke global conversation, and spark viral engagement in multiple markets simultaneously. The globalization of the Super Bowl also reshaped creative strategies. Brands began incorporating universal themes, family, friendship, humor, and triumph that could resonate across cultural boundaries. Humor, for example, was carefully calibrated to be comprehensible and appealing to diverse audiences. Emotional storytelling, whether through music, narrative arcs, or visual motifs, was employed to create connections that transcended language and geography. In some cases, campaigns featured localized adaptations, including subtitles, culturally relevant casting, and narrative adjustments designed to maximize impact in specific regions. The goal was to create advertising that maintained the intensity and memorability of domestic campaigns while achieving relevance and relatability in international markets. The stakes of global exposure were immense. Super Bowl commercials, already commanding $7 million per 30-second slot in the United States, acquired extended value through international reach. A campaign that performed well overseas could generate exponential returns in brand recognition, engagement, and revenue. Conversely, missteps in tone, messaging, or cultural sensitivity could provoke backlash on a scale unimaginable in earlier decades. Advertisers faced the dual challenge of maintaining narrative coherence for domestic audiences while navigating diverse cultural expectations abroad. This required meticulous planning, research, and consultation with cultural experts to avoid misinterpretation or offense. Brands also leveraged globalization to cultivate long-term loyalty in emerging markets. International viewers who encountered American advertising for the first time during the Super Bowl were often young, digitally connected, and socially active. These audiences were highly receptive to campaigns that combined spectacle with aspirational storytelling. By presenting products, values, and narratives that resonated with global sensibilities, companies could establish early emotional connections, planting seeds for future engagement and market penetration. The Super Bowl thus became both a commercial event and a strategic entry point into the global consumer economy. Globalization further intensified the importance of digital amplification. While live broadcast remained central to the Super Bowl experience in the United States, overseas audiences increasingly encountered advertisements through on-demand platforms, social media feeds, and viral sharing. Clips from commercials were uploaded to YouTube within minutes. Hashtags trended internationally, and memes emerged that referenced global pop culture. Advertisers had to anticipate this extended life cycle of content, creating campaigns that were both immediate in impact and resilient in sustained online circulation. The Super Bowl became not just a television event, but a multimedia global conversation that extended far beyond the game itself. Streaming and international accessibility also reshaped audience expectations. Viewers from different countries brought diverse perspectives, cultural frames of reference, and sensibilities to the experience. Campaigns that relied on purely American references risked alienating or confusing international audiences, while narratives that could translate universally achieved amplified resonance. Advertisers increasingly employed data analytics to understand these global audience dynamics, assessing engagement, sentiment, and recall across regions. Real-time monitoring allowed brands to adapt messaging strategies for future campaigns, closing the feedback loop between performance and creative refinement on a worldwide scale. The globalization of the Super Bowl also influenced the types of narratives that dominated advertising. Spectacle became essential, as visually arresting content could communicate meaning even without spoken language. Music, emotive imagery, and universal symbols became critical storytelling devices. A brand's ability to evoke laughter, empathy, or wonder visually increased its international impact. This reliance on cinematic universality contributed to the ongoing trend of Super Bowl commercials as short films, directed with precision and designed to engage audiences regardless of linguistic barriers. The athlete's role evolved in this global context. Players became recognizable cultural icons far beyond the United States, embodying ideals of athleticism, perseverance, and aspiration. Their participation in Super Bowl commercials amplified both the domestic and international impact of campaigns. Audiences who had never attended an American football game could associate familiar faces with aspirational narratives, products, and cultural values. The fusion of celebrity, spectacle, and narrative created a cross-border appeal that further cemented the Super Bowl's status as a global advertising event. Brands also adapted to globalized social media culture. International reactions, commentary, and engagement influenced future advertising strategies. Hashtags viral clips and user-generated content allowed brands to extend the life cycle of campaigns and measure effectiveness in real time across continents. The global dimension required sensitivity to cultural norms, humor, and values while maintaining the intensity and memorability that characterize Super Bowl advertising. Advertisers learned to balance universality with specificity, creating content that resonated both locally and internationally. The economic implications of globalization were profound. Super Bowl campaigns became investments not only in domestic sales, but in brand positioning and recognition worldwide. Companies leveraged the platform to launch products, introduce global campaigns, and build cultural associations that would persist across markets. The integration of international metrics into planning and evaluation expanded the scope of advertising from a national spectacle to a global strategy. The Super Bowl became a template for how to synchronize domestic prestige with international influence. It's a convergence of sport, culture, and commerce on a worldwide scale. In essence, The globalization of the Super Bowl transformed the event into an international holiday for advertising. It became a shared experience for millions of viewers across time zones and continents, where brands could communicate universal narratives, test cross-cultural engagement, and create enduring impact. The combination of streaming technology, social media, and cultural universality allowed the Super Bowl to transcend its origins, positioning both the game and its commercials as central to global media consumption and marketing strategy. The global Super Bowl is no longer only about football. 'Tis about spectacle, narrative, and influence on a scale unmatched in any other televised event. Brands, athletes, and networks have learned to exploit this reach, creating campaigns that resonate emotionally, culturally, and economically. The interplay between local tradition and global relevance defines the contemporary Super Bowl experience, demonstrating that the power of advertising extends far beyond national borders. The 30-second spot, once intended for American audiences, now carries worldwide significance, shaping perception, culture, and consumption across the globe. By embracing globalization, the Super Bowl has become both a cultural and commercial export. The event's advertisements now operate as instruments of international influence, embedding themselves in the cultural consciousness of multiple nations simultaneously. The strategies, narratives, precision of the hidden machine are applied not only to domestic markets but to audiences spanning continents, demonstrating the immense scale and sophistication of contemporary advertising. This global reach reinforces the Super Bowl's dual role as a sporting spectacle and an unparalleled platform for marketing ingenuity. Super Bowl advertisements are often remembered for their spectacle, their humor, and the celebrities who appear in them. Yet behind these seemingly effortless moments lies a meticulous orchestration of psychological principles designed to shape human perception and emotion. These 30-second narratives are engineered with precision, leveraging techniques that operate beneath conscious awareness to produce measurable responses in viewers. Color, sound, timing, and narrative structure are not chosen arbitrarily. They are instruments of influence, calibrated to guide attention, evoke emotion, and embed memories within the mind. Understanding the art of manipulation reveals the hidden sophistication behind the Super Bowl's advertising phenomenon. Color theory is one of the most powerful tools in the advertiser's arsenal. Colors evoke universal associations, trigger emotional responses, and influence perception instantaneously. Red can signify urgency, passion, or excitement. Blue communicates trust, reliability, and calm. Yellow draws attention, evokes optimism, and signals playfulness. In Super Bowl spots, color palettes are carefully selected to align with brand identity while eliciting the desired emotional state. A soft golden hue in a Coca-Cola commercial can evoke nostalgia, warmth, and comfort, while high-contrast combinations in a car commercial create tension, anticipation, and exhilaration. Each color choice is a deliberate signal, guiding the subconscious interpretation of narrative, character, and product. Sound design operates alongside color to amplify emotional impact. Music, voiceover, and ambient noise are meticulously synchronized with visual content to create immersive experiences. A swelling orchestral score can elevate suspense and excitement, while a soft piano motif may elicit intimacy and reflection. The timing of auditory cues is crucial. The precise moment a cymbal crashes, a beat drops, or dialogue is emphasized can determine whether a joke lands. An emotional beat resonates, or a product moment becomes memorable. Sound functions as both narrative and emotional punctuation, manipulating the physiological and psychological state of viewers. Timing in storytelling is equally critical. The structure of a 30-second spot must engage, build tension, and deliver resolution with exacting precision. Advertisers consider pacing in frames, cuts, and transitions to maintain attention, maximize impact, and heighten memorability. A delayed punchline, an abrupt reveal, or a moment of silence can intensify emotion and focus viewer attention. These manipulations exploit natural cognitive rhythms, capitalizing on anticipation, surprise, and emotional release to strengthen retention and association. Every second is a calculated choice, designed to elicit specific reactions while keeping the audience cognitively and emotionally engaged. Narrative framing is another element of manipulation. Advertisers craft stories that resonate with archetypes, universal experiences, and cultural expectations. The hero's journey, redemption arcs, familial warmth, or triumph over adversity are common motifs. These narratives tap into deeply ingrained psychological patterns, eliciting empathy, admiration, or aspiration. The product is embedded within these stories, benefiting from the emotional resonance without appearing intrusive. The viewer's subconscious associates the positive emotions of the narrative with the brand, creating an enduring and influential connection. Visual composition is carefully considered to enhance manipulation. Placement of characters, use of symmetry, depth of field, and camera movement all influence perception. Close-ups foster intimacy, encouraging viewers to connect with emotions on the actor's face. Wide shots establish context, scale, or grandeur. Fast cuts can create excitement and energy, while lingering shots encourage reflection. Advertisers choreograph these visual elements to complement narrative. Timing, sound, and color, creating an integrated sensory experience that engages multiple cognitive pathways simultaneously. Behavioral psychology underpins these techniques. Advertisers leverage cognitive biases and heuristics to influence decision-making. The mere exposure effect increases familiarity and preference through repetition. Emotional priming conditions viewers to respond favorably to a product by associating it with positive affect. Social proof is employed through depictions of groups, celebrity endorsements, or aspirational behavior. These methods exploit natural tendencies in human cognition, guiding perception and preference subtly yet powerfully. Humor and surprise are also engineered tools of manipulation. Laughter increases attentiveness, strengthens memory, and produces favorable associations. Unexpected twists engage curiosity and heighten emotional response. In Super Bowl spots, jokes are carefully timed, punchlines meticulously constructed, and visual gags tested for maximum effectiveness. Surprise can occur in narrative turns, product reveals, or celebrity appearances. The brain's heightened state during moments of humor or shock facilitates deeper encoding of information, ensuring that viewers remember the advertisement long after the broadcast ends. Manipulation extends to emotional valence. Advertisements often oscillate between tension and relief, sadness and joy, anticipation and gratification. These emotional trajectories are designed to mimic natural storytelling rhythms, engaging the limbic system and reinforcing memory consolidation. A heartwarming moment between family members, a triumphant reveal, or an act of kindness is calibrated to produce dopamine and oxytocin responses, biologically embedding favorable associations with the brand. The commercial becomes not merely seen, but experienced emotionally, creating resonance that persists long after the game has concluded. The manipulation is not only emotional, but also social. Super Bowl commercials exploit the collective viewing environment, anticipating how shared reactions influence individual perception. Humor, awe, or surprise are amplified in group settings, where laughter, applause, or commentary heightens engagement. Advertisers design moments that generate social signaling, ensuring the content becomes a topic of discussion, a shared cultural reference point, and a vehicle for communal experience. The campaign extends beyond the individual, influencing networks of attention, conversation, and perception. Technology has enhanced the precision of this manipulation. Eye-tracking studies, facial coding, and biometric monitoring inform the placement of visual elements, pacing of narrative, and timing of emotional beats. Neuroscientific insights into attention, memory, and emotional processing guide decisions in color, sound, and story structure. Advertisers can measure real-time responses, refine campaigns based on data, and predict the efficacy of new content with unprecedented accuracy. What once relied on intuition and creativity now incorporates empirical understanding of human perception at every stage. The cumulative effect is profound. Viewers experience advertisements as entertaining, memorable, and culturally significant, often without recognizing the degree to which their attention, emotion, and memory have been guided. The manipulation is subtle, sophisticated, and extraordinarily effective. In 30 seconds, a Super Bowl commercial can evoke laughter, tears, or inspiration, while creating an enduring bond between the audience and the brand. The artistry of manipulation lies in its invisibility, in the ability to move, persuade, and embed meaning without apparent effort or intrusion. Super Bowl advertisers have mastered the convergence of art, science, and psychology. Each element, color, sound, timing, narrative, and composition is carefully orchestrated to produce a specific cognitive and emotional response. The result is a seamless experience in which viewers perceive entertainment and artistry, while the underlying manipulation operates beneath conscious awareness. These 30-second spots are microcosms of human psychology, designed to harness attention, emotion, and memory in ways that extend far beyond conventional advertising. Understanding the art of manipulation provides insight into the enduring power of the Super Bowl as a platform for influence. These commercials are not accidental moments of cultural significance. They are carefully engineered instruments designed to capture attention, evoke emotion, and shape perception. The audience experiences them as entertainment, yet every element has been calibrated to maximize impact. In this sense, the Super Bowl advertisement is a testament to the mastery of psychological, artistic, and technological expertise, a convergence of forces that manipulates perception with unparalleled precision. The power of these techniques underscores why Super Bowl commercials have transcended their original commercial function. They are remembered decades later, discussed in cultural discourse, and analyzed for artistic and emotional impact. This persistence is the product of meticulous attention to the ways human beings see, hear, feel, and remember. The art of manipulation is central to their effectiveness, demonstrating that the 30-second spot is a sophisticated instrument of persuasion, engineered with a deep understanding of human psychology. The Super Bowl has long been the pinnacle of American sports, a contest of strategy, skill, and spectacle that draws tens of millions of viewers each year. Yet there are moments when the drama on the field is not the story remembered. When touchdowns, interceptions, and game-winning drives are eclipsed by the 30-second narratives unfolding in commercials. These are the games when advertising, carefully crafted and emotionally potent, surpasses the sport itself, capturing the imagination of the public and becoming the headline of cultural conversation. One such instance occurred during the 1984 Super Bowl, long remembered for Apple's groundbreaking commercial introducing the Macintosh. While the game itself held the expected competitive tension, it is the commercial that etched itself into history. Ridley Scott's cinematic vision of a dystopian future, interrupted by a lone heroine smashing conformity, resonated far beyond the stadium or living room. Viewers discussed it for weeks, dissected its meaning, and marveled at its production value. The game was played, the scoreboard updated. Yet the cultural memory centered on 30 seconds of story, innovation, and spectacle. The 1993 Super Bowl featured another moment when advertising dominated public discourse. The Coca-Cola Always Coca-Cola campaign introduced the world to the polar bears, a playful, endearing animation that captured hearts in a way the game could not. Fans recalled the bears sliding across ice, playfully interacting and celebrating in ways that transcended the moment-to-moment tension of the football game. The memory of those commercials endured, appearing in magazines, television retrospectives, and cultural commentary long after the season had ended. The advertisement had become an event in itself. Super Bowl 34 in 2000 presented a more contemporary example of this phenomenon. The game concluded with the dramatic last-second tackle that denied the St. Louis Rams a tying touchdown, a moment of intensity etched in NFL history. Yet even this electrifying conclusion was rivaled in cultural conversation by advertisements that aired in the same broadcast. Budweiser's iconic frogs returned with humorous antics, while Pepsi's star-studded campaign, featuring celebrity cameos and elaborate choreography, dominated social discussion. Viewers shared clips online, quoted dialogue, and celebrated creative ingenuity more than athletic performance. The commercials were not background. They were the main story. The 2004 Super Bowl offered a more pointed example of advertising overshadowing the game in terms of cultural discourse. Janet Jackson and Justin Timberlake's halftime performance, punctuated by a wardrobe malfunction, became the media narrative for weeks. Yet concurrently, advertisers capitalized on attention to craft spots that leveraged humor, suspense, and celebrity endorsement to extraordinary effect. A campaign featuring humorous family scenarios or unexpected celebrity cameos generated more lasting public engagement than the game's actual plays. Media outlets reported on which ads were most discussed, analyzed audience reactions, and chronicled viewer preferences, revealing that the marketing spectacle had become the dominant cultural artifact of the event. Economic factors contributed to this phenomenon. Advertisers invest millions in creating campaigns that capture attention, evoke emotion, and generate conversation. In many cases, these investments exceed the financial resources devoted to player salaries, stadium operations, or broadcast production. The weight of this financial commitment heightens the incentive to make each second unforgettable, pushing advertisers to innovate with narrative, humor, visual effects, and emotional resonance. The result is content that competes with and often surpasses the game itself in memorability and cultural impact. Social media further amplified this effect in the 21st century. Platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok transformed the audience into active participants, amplifying moments, sharing reactions, and elevating advertisements into global conversation. Viral clips of commercials traveled faster and further than highlights of gameplays. Meme culture emerged, dissecting humor, plot, or celebrity appearances in ways the stadium could not contain. The 30-second spot became a cultural event that outlived the live broadcast, demonstrating that attention is no longer exclusively anchored in the action on the field. Some viewers acknowledged this phenomenon with ambivalence. Sports enthusiasts committed to athletic achievement noted that memorable games were often overshadowed by 30-second narratives. Conversely, casual viewers and cultural commentators observed that advertisements provided shared reference points, humor, and emotional resonance that the game alone did not always offer. The convergence of mass attention, emotional storytelling, and social amplification created moments when advertising eclipsed the Super Bowl itself, suggesting a reconfiguration of priorities in cultural memory. Several factors explain why commercials could dominate perception over the game. Emotional intensity is one. 30-second spots are designed to evoke immediate feelings, laughter, surprise, nostalgia, or awe in compressed, concentrated doses. Football games unfold over hours, requiring sustained attention and cognitive engagement, whereas a commercial delivers a complete emotional experience in half a minute. The brain often retains emotionally charged, self-contained narratives more vividly than extended events with shifting attention, which explains why viewers recall certain advertisements more readily than complex game sequences. The brevity and repeatability of commercials also enhance their memorability. A game's outcome is singular, experienced once, and subject to selective attention. A 30-second spot can be paused, replayed, shared, and analyzed in multiple contexts, increasing exposure and reinforcing memory consolidation. Advertisers strategically design content to be visually striking, audibly memorable, and narratively resonant, maximizing the likelihood that it will occupy a permanent place in cultural consciousness. This repeatability magnifies impact beyond initial viewing, elevating commercials above gameplays in long-term recall. Cultural relevance further amplifies this effect. Advertisements often reference contemporary issues, social trends, or nostalgic icons, creating bridges between the audience's lived experience and the event. Super Bowl commercials introduce novelty, surprise, or emotional resonance that situates the viewer within a cultural conversation, whereas the game's outcome may be transient or confined to fan communities. The interplay between social discourse and emotional storytelling elevates certain ads to cultural prominence, allowing them to overshadow athletic achievements in public memory. The phenomenon is not uniform across all Super Bowls. Some games feature performances, strategic brilliance, or dramatic finishes that dominate discourse for months. Yet when advertising aligns with creativity, emotional resonance, and cultural awareness, it can rival or surpass even the most dramatic athletic moments. Iconic examples demonstrate that when narrative, emotion, and spectacle converge in a 30-second interval, the advertisement becomes the central artifact, outlasting the scoreboard and redefining how the event is remembered. Super Bowl 49 in 2015 illustrates this perfectly. The Seattle Seahawks and New England Patriots delivered a dramatic finish that thrilled sports fans. However, cultural discourse also centered on innovative advertising. Budweiser returned with the beloved Clydesdales. Doritos presented fan-generated content, and humorous spots featuring unexpected celebrity appearances dominated social sharing. Analysts, media outlets, and viewers dedicated significant attention to the ads, dissecting narrative, humor, and production quality. The commercial conversation rivaled the discussion of game performance, exemplifying the evolving balance of attention between sport and spectacle. Ultimately, these moments reveal the shifting hierarchy of attention. The Super Bowl is no longer simply a sporting event. It is a platform where advertising can command cultural significance, influence perception, and occupy collective memory in ways that rival the athletic competition itself. Commercials have become self-contained events within the larger broadcast, capable of eclipsing even the most dramatic plays, heroic performances, or last-minute touchdowns. The 30-second narrative now carries a weight of its own, shaping public discourse and cementing the Super Bowl's dual identity as both sport and cultural spectacle. The trend reflects broader changes in media consumption, cultural priorities, and the psychology of attention. Audiences respond to emotionally charged, self-contained narratives with a clarity and immediacy that can surpass extended, complex events. Advertisers have harnessed this dynamic with precision, ensuring that certain Super Bowl commercials transcend their commercial purpose to become enduring artifacts of cultural memory. In these cases, the game serves as a backdrop, a frame for the stories that capture the imagination, evoke emotion, and define public conversation. When ads overshadow the game, it is not an accident but the result of intentional, sophisticated, and emotionally resonant design. The combination of narrative, emotional manipulation, cultural relevance, and social amplification produces moments that dominate collective attention. The Super Bowl becomes a dual event where 30 seconds of story, humor, or spectacle can rival 4 quarters of athletic performance in shaping memory, conversation, and cultural legacy. Advertising, once a supplement to the game, emerges as a parallel center of gravity, an enduring force in the cultural mythology of the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl has always reflected the cutting edge of culture, technology, and media. But the 21st century is pushing advertising into realms previously unimaginable. We are entering a digital future, where the mechanics of emotion, attention, occasion, and persuasion are increasingly powered by artificial intelligence, machine learning, and real-time personalization. The traditional 30-second spot, once a static product of creative teams and production studios, is evolving into a dynamic, adaptive, and highly precise instrument capable of tailoring emotional impact to individual viewers on a global scale. The implications are profound, reshaping both the economics of the Super Bowl and the psychology of how audiences engage with its commercials. One of the most transformative developments is the integration of AI in content creation. Algorithms can now analyze vast datasets of viewer behavior, social media trends, cultural preferences, and even biometric responses to previous advertisements. This allows advertisers to generate content optimized for maximum emotional impact, attention retention, and brand recall. The creative process, once guided primarily by intuition, experience, and market research, now incorporates predictive analytics capable of identifying which narrative arcs, visual compositions, sound design elements, and emotional beats are most likely to succeed. The result is a new generation of advertising that blends artistic vision with computational precision. Real-time personalization is another frontier. Traditional Super Bowl commercials have been designed for a mass audience, a single broadcast intended to reach millions simultaneously. AI now allows brands to adapt elements of the commercial based on viewer data. For instance, an advertisement streamed on a connected device might adjust character emphasis, music, or narrative framing based on regional preferences, demographic markers, or even prior engagement with similar content. Viewers can experience subtly different versions of the same commercial, each engineered to maximize relevance and emotional resonance. The 30-second spot becomes a living, responsive entity, capable of adjusting to its audience with a sophistication impossible in earlier eras. The integration of digital interactivity is also reshaping the landscape. Audiences can engage with Super Bowl advertisements through apps, social media, and interactive platforms, extending the emotional arc beyond the broadcast itself. Polls, augmented reality features, and gamified experiences allow viewers to participate in the narrative, reinforcing the emotional connection and deepening memory retention. AI algorithms monitor engagement, feeding data back to advertisers who can refine campaigns in real time or optimize future productions for similar audiences. The Super Bowl becomes both a live event and an ongoing, data-driven cultural phenomenon. Emotion engineering, a practice long rooted in traditional media, is being taken to new heights. Using insights from neuroscience, AI can predict and manipulate the emotional trajectory of a commercial with extraordinary precision. Algorithms analyze previous campaigns to identify which sequences elicit laughter, empathy, surprise, or nostalgia, and can design story beats optimized for rapid and enduring emotional impact. Facial recognition, eye tracking, and biometric data from test audiences provide additional input, allowing algorithms to fine-tune content to the physiological responses of viewers. Advertisers are no longer relying solely on intuition or anecdotal feedback. They are applying the principles of computational psychology to craft moments that resonate with individual viewers at a subconscious level. The digital future also expands the potential for global reach and relevance. Streaming platforms allow brands to tailor ads to international audiences with unprecedented precision. Localization can go beyond language to encompass cultural symbols, narrative archetypes, humor, and visual motifs that resonate with specific regions. AI can identify trending cultural references in real time, integrating them into campaigns that maintain the intensity and memorability of domestic Super Bowl commercials while achieving relevance across diverse markets. This represents a dramatic evolution from the early days of satellite broadcasts, transforming the Super Bowl into a worldwide, hyper-personalized advertising platform. Ethical considerations are emerging alongside these technological advancements. The ability to manipulate emotion, attention, and memory with such precision raises questions about consent, cognitive influence, and the boundaries of commercial persuasion. Super Bowl advertisements, long celebrated for their creativity and spectacle, are increasingly powered by systems capable of subtle, pervasive influence. Audiences may respond to content engineered to trigger neural and emotional responses without conscious awareness, creating both opportunities and challenges for regulators, consumers, and brands themselves. The cultural power of advertising is magnified in this digital era, and with it comes a responsibility to navigate the intersection of influence, engagement, and ethics. Economic implications are equally significant. AI-generated content, real-time personalization, and digital amplification offer brands the potential for unprecedented efficiency and return on investment. Advertisers can target high-value viewers more precisely, measure engagement with granular detail, and optimize campaigns in ways previously unimaginable. The cost of producing a memorable Super Bowl commercial, once dictated by production values and celebrity appearances, can now be strategically augmented or reduced through computational insights, reducing risk while maximizing cultural impact. Networks, leagues, and advertisers are converging in a hyper-competitive digital marketplace, where the sophistication of data and technology drives the next frontier of influence. The integration of AI and digital tools also transforms the creative process. Directors, writers, and production teams increasingly collaborate with data scientists and engineers, blending artistic intuition with algorithmic insight. Creative decisions about story, pacing, sound, and visual composition are informed by predictive models, allowing campaigns to achieve both artistic and emotional precision. The Super Bowl advertisement becomes a hybrid of art and science, an intersection of human creativity and machine intelligence designed to capture attention, evoke emotion, and leave an enduring mark on culture. Social media magnifies the impact of these innovations. AI can monitor trends, engagement patterns, and viral propagation in real time, enabling advertisers to respond to audience reactions within hours or even minutes. Content can be adapted, remixed, or amplified based on emergent social dynamics, ensuring that campaigns remain relevant, shareable, and culturally resonant. Super Bowl commercials, once constrained to 30-second broadcast windows, now live in an ongoing cycle of digital amplification, conversation, and adaptation. The narrative extends far beyond the stadium or television, reinforcing the commercial's presence in cultural memory. This digital future suggests that the Super Bowl, while still a sporting event, is increasingly a laboratory for advertising innovation. AI-generated spots, real-time personalization, and emotion engineering redefine the boundaries of creative influence, transforming the relationship between viewer, narrative, and brand. The 30-second commercial is no longer static. It is dynamic, responsive, and highly calibrated to human perception and emotion. Advertisers are exploring possibilities previously confined to science fiction, blending technology, psychology, and storytelling to craft experiences that resonate individually, socially, and globally. The implications for cultural memory are significant. Just as Apple's 1984 and Coca-Cola's polar bears became enduring icons, the next generation of AI-powered, digitally optimized commercials may create lasting impressions tailored to each viewer. These campaigns are engineered to maximize engagement, shareability, and memorability on an unprecedented scale. The Super Bowl remains a central spectacle, but the advertisements themselves are evolving into an immersive, interactive, and personalized experience that can outlast and overshadow the game in public consciousness. The convergence of AI, digital media, and advertising sophistication signals a new era in Super Bowl history. The event has evolved from a national sporting spectacle into a platform for global, hyper-personalized emotional influence. As technology advances, the ability to craft, measure, and optimize emotional impact in real time will become a defining feature of the Super Bowl experience. This is the digital frontier, where 30 seconds of narrative are amplified through algorithms, tailored for individuals and embedded into the social and cultural fabric in ways that will redefine attention, memory, and engagement for decades to come. The Super Bowl is more than a game. It is a cultural ritual, an annual convergence of sport, spectacle, and commerce that reflects the values, desires, and anxieties of American society. Over the decades, as advertising evolved from modest spots to cinematic, emotionally charged narratives, the event became a mirror, showing not only what Americans celebrate, but also what captures their attention, shapes their emotions, and informs their collective imagination. The rise of the Super Bowl commercial offers profound insight into how culture, commerce, and psychology intersect to shape modern identity. In examining this phenomenon, one sees that the advertisements themselves are a lens through which we understand the priorities of society. Early campaigns in the 1960s were practical and unassuming, promoting products with straightforward messaging and modest budgets. They reflect a period in which consumption was emerging as a symbol of prosperity, post-war optimism, and national unity. These ads were aspirational, yet familiar, echoing the lived experience of the average viewer. They presented ideals that Americans could relate to, encouraging the pursuit of comfort, leisure, and modern convenience, while simultaneously embedding brands into the fabric of daily life. As the decades progressed, the ads became more ambitious, theatrical, and emotionally sophisticated. By the 1980s and 1990s, commercials were no longer merely promotional tools, but cultural events in their own right. Apple's 1984 presented a narrative that resonated with fears, desires, and the imagination of a generation. Coca-Cola's Mean Joe Greene exploited nostalgia, innocence, and redemption to evoke a complex blend of empathy and joy. These ads were remembered not for the products they sold, but for the emotional experiences they generated. They demonstrated that attention and emotional resonance could rival athletic achievement in shaping public memory. This evolution reveals something fundamental about the American psyche. The Super Bowl commercial became a shorthand for what audiences value: humor, creativity, emotional depth, and shared cultural references. These 30-second narratives act as cultural touchstones, referencing collective experiences, childhood memories, and aspirational ideals. In many ways, the commercials function as modern myths, condensed stories with moral undertones, heroes, challenges, and resolutions. They are narrative microcosms that reflect society's collective hopes, fears, and fantasies. Viewers recall the polar bears, the frogs, and cinematic heroes not because of product placement, but because the stories mirror human experience. Even within the artificial construct of advertising, the rise of digital media and globalization has further intensified this phenomenon. Social media platforms amplify the reach of advertisements, transforming them into interactive and participatory experiences. Consumers share, critique, and remix content, extending the influence of these campaigns far beyond the television broadcast. AI, data analytics, and targeted marketing allow advertisers to refine narratives and emotional cues to maximize engagement across diverse demographics and cultural contexts. In this sense, the Super Bowl commercial has become a living cultural artifact, evolving in real time as audiences interact with it, internalize it, and disseminate it across social networks. From a psychological perspective, the prominence of advertising over the game itself highlights our susceptibility to emotion, memory, and attention manipulation. Neuroscience reveals that emotionally charged experiences, humor, and narrative closure significantly enhance recall. While the game unfolds over hours with fluctuating tension, the 30-second ad delivers concentrated emotional stimulation that is readily remembered. The commercial becomes a focal point of cultural memory because it engages viewers on multiple cognitive and emotional levels simultaneously. It is designed not only to entertain, but to embed itself in the imagination. In reflecting on the cultural mirror, one observes that the Super Bowl commercial exposes tensions inherent in American identity. On one hand, it celebrates innovation, creativity, and storytelling mastery. On the other, it underscores consumerism, psychological influence, and the commodification of attention. Americans take pride in ingenuity, humor, and narrative craft, yet they are simultaneously subject to the subtle persuasion embedded in every frame, sound, and color choice. The event reveals a paradox. Admiration for creativity exists alongside an unquestioned embrace of commercial influence. Our fascination with these 30-second stories speaks to a cultural tolerance for an even celebration of manipulation when it is presented as entertainment. The Super Bowl also serves as a mirror for the social values and political currents of its time. In recent years, brands have used commercials to engage with activism, diversity, and identity politics. While some campaigns have been celebrated for boldness and relevance, others have sparked controversy, backlash, or debate. the audience's response becomes a reflection of societal attitudes, revealing collective expectations, cultural fault lines, and the negotiation between tradition and progress. These moments demonstrate that advertising is not a passive reflection, but an active participant in shaping and contesting cultural norms. Examining the arc of Super Bowl advertising also reveals the interplay between technology, psychology, and commerce. Early campaigns relied on creativity, intuition, and modest budgets. Modern campaigns leverage AI, data analytics, and behavioral science to maximize emotional engagement and memory retention. The sophistication of contemporary advertisements reflects a broader cultural trend toward precision, optimization, and personalization. It shows that attention has become a valuable commodity and that the ability to capture and influence it is central to cultural authority. The Super Bowl, in this sense, is a laboratory for understanding how media shapes perception, emotion, and collective consciousness. At its core, the Super Bowl commercial is a mirror of aspiration. It embodies ideals, fantasies, and desires that extend beyond products. Humor, heroism, nostalgia, and spectacle are woven into narratives that resonate with universal human experiences. The audience's fascination with these campaigns demonstrates that storytelling, emotion, and cultural reference can rival athletic achievement in cultural significance. It also reflects a society increasingly oriented toward media, narrative, and consumption as primary means of meaning-making. Advertising becomes not just a tool for selling products, but a vehicle for shaping cultural identity, reinforcing values and embedding shared stories into collective memory. The phenomenon also prompts reflection on the nature of attention itself. In a media-saturated environment, the ability to capture, sustain, and manipulate attention has become a central axis of influence. Super Bowl advertisers demonstrate mastery of these principles, creating moments that are remembered, shared, and celebrated precisely because they exploit the dynamics of perception, cognition, and emotion. In doing so, the commercials reflect both the ingenuity and vulnerability of audiences, illustrating how human experience is mediated by narrative, spectacle, and emotion. Ultimately, the Super Bowl and its advertising represent a symbiotic relationship between sport, culture, and commerce. The game provides a stage, a moment of collective focus, while the commercials provide stories, emotion, and shared experience. The rise of advertising to prominence within the event reveals as much about viewers as it does about brands. It highlights the values we celebrate, the emotions we prioritize, and the narratives we internalize. The 30-second spot becomes a lens through which we see ourselves, our society, and the evolving priorities of American culture. The Super Bowl is a mirror that shows both aspiration and influence. Advertising has grown to dominate attention, shape emotion, and define memory, reflecting a culture that prizes spectacle, emotional resonance, and shared narrative experiences. The phenomenon is not simply commercial. It is cultural, psychological, and symbolic. As Americans engage with these moments, they are participating in a ritual of attention, memory, and meaning-making that extends far beyond football, revealing the power of narrative, emotion, and shared experience to shape collective identity. The evolution of Super Bowl advertising from modest beginnings to global spectacle mirrors broader shifts in society. It illuminates the interplay between culture, commerce, and technology, demonstrating how attention is captured, emotion is guided, and collective memory is shaped. Each iconic campaign, from the first humble broadcasts to AI-optimized digital experiences, functions as a reflection of both the possibilities and vulnerabilities inherent in a society enthralled by storytelling, spectacle, and persuasion. The Super Bowl has become a cultural mirror, revealing the narratives we value, the emotions we prioritize, and the myths we carry as a society. In the end, the Super Bowl commercial teaches us about ourselves. It exposes the mechanics of attention and emotion, illustrates the cultural ideals we celebrate, and captures the myths we internalize. These 30-second stories, often more memorable than the plays on the field, are a testament to human fascination with narrative, spectacle, and emotional resonance. They remind us that culture is constructed not only through action and achievement, but also through the stories we tell, the emotions we share, and the attention we collectively devote. The Super Bowl is a stage. The game is a contest. But the commercials are a reflection, a cultural mirror of who we are, what we desire, and how we remember. At the core of this reflection is the idea of meaning. The Super Bowl is a repository of memory, emotion, and cultural identity. Each ad, each narrative choice, contributes to a mosaic that tells a story about what society values, fears, and desires. Athletic achievement remains the foundation, but the surrounding spectacle amplifies, contextualizes, and sometimes eclipses it. The 30-second story becomes a defining element of the event, a marker of cultural significance that endures long after the game concludes. Memory, meaning, and emotion converge in ways that reveal the complex dynamics of modern attention and cultural construction. As we consider the legacy of the Super Bowl, it becomes clear that the event is a study in duality. It is a celebration of human achievement, innovation, and creativity. It is also a demonstration of influence, persuasion, and the orchestration of attention. The commercials that now dominate the conversation are both art and instrument, cultural artifact and strategic device. They are testament to ingenuity and evidence of the subtle power of commercial storytelling. They reveal how culture, emotion, and memory can be shaped, amplified, and shared on an unprecedented scale. Ultimately, the Super Bowl stands as a reflection of human desire for narrative, spectacle, and shared experience. It demonstrates the interplay between achievement and attention, competition and culture, sport and story. The game has become inseparable from the stories built around it, and the stories have become inseparable from the game. This fusion illustrates the evolving relationship between media, memory, and meaning in contemporary society. We are captivated not only by what is done on the field, but by what is created around it, by what captures our imagination, stirs our emotion, and becomes lodged in memory. The haunting question at the end of this journey is not merely about commerce or sport. It is about the cost of spectacle. We remember the ads, the narratives, the stories told in 30 seconds, yet we also risk losing sight of the original contest. The human struggle, the pursuit of excellence on the field. Memory becomes a landscape of curated emotion, a terrain where meaning is shaped as much by marketing genius as by athletic prowess. This dual legacy is both exhilarating and sobering. It reminds us that culture, like attention, can be guided, that memory can be crafted, and that the line between spectacle and substance is increasingly delicate. The Super Bowl is a mirror reflecting our fascination with narrative, emotion, and attention. It captures the tension between achievement and persuasion, between sport and commerce, between reality and storytelling. The 30-second commercial has become as culturally significant as the game itself, a testament to creativity, psychology, and the orchestration of memory. As the roar fades and the stadium empties, the narratives endure. The plays may be forgotten, but the stories, the emotional beats, and the spectacle remain lodged in our collective consciousness, shaping how we remember, how we aspire, and how we understand the culture that surrounds us. In the final analysis, the Super Bowl is both a celebration and a cautionary tale. It is a testament to human ingenuity and the power of narrative. It is also a reminder of the complexity of attention, memory, and influence. The event challenges us to consider what we value, what we remember, and what we allow to shape our perception. The Super Bowl demonstrates the extraordinary capacity of storytelling to define culture, the remarkable skill of advertisers to capture and manipulate emotion, and the enduring fascination audiences have with spectacle, creativity, and shared experience. It is a mirror, a memory, and a meditation on the cost of attention, the allure of narrative, and the intersection of sport, commerce, and culture. The game may end, but the stories persist. The commercials, the myths, the emotions they evoke, and the attention they command are permanent markers in the cultural landscape. In the end, the Super Bowl reminds us that spectacle is both a reflection of who we are and a force that shapes who we will become. The legacy is complex, the impact profound, and the cost invisible yet real. We are drawn to the glory of the game, but it is the brilliance of the storytelling, the orchestration of emotion, and the crafting of memory that defines the Super Bowl as the unique cultural phenomenon it has become. This is the enduring lesson of the Super Bowl. It is a narrative of achievement intertwined with influence, a spectacle of athleticism entwined with emotional and cultural engineering. The event challenges, captivates, and reflects. It asks us to consider what we celebrate, what we remember, and what we allow to shape our collective imagination. In doing so, it offers a haunting yet illuminating perspective on memory, meaning, and the cost of spectacle in modern culture. The Super Bowl is no longer simply a game. It is an institution where attention, emotion, and memory converge to create a ritual of extraordinary influence. It is a mirror of desire, innovation, and the complex architecture of modern identity. It is a story about us. It is a story we cannot forget. The Super Bowl began as a contest of athletic prowess, a celebration of skill, strategy, and endurance. It was meant to crown a champion, a culmination of months of preparation, struggle, and human ambition. Fans would gather, not just to witness the spectacle of elite athletes performing at the peak of their abilities, but to experience the communal thrill of competition itself. The roar of the crowd, the tension of a decisive play, the elation of victory, and the heartbreak of defeat were the primary markers of memory and emotion. Yet over decades, the contours of the event shifted. Gradually, the focus extended beyond the field, beyond the players, and even beyond the championship. Attention began to drift to the advertisements. The 30-second narratives that interrupted the game, but soon demanded to be the main event. In the process, the Super Bowl transformed from a purely athletic contest into a platform of culture, commerce, and collective attention. The journey from modest broadcast to global spectacle is remarkable in its scope. The first Super Bowl ads were humble and practical, a reflection of a television landscape still discovering its own potential. Brands were cautious, budgets were modest, and the audience was measured in local or regional terms. Yet these early campaigns laid the groundwork for what would become an unprecedented cultural phenomenon. The event provided a captive audience of millions, a platform that could elevate a brand, embed a slogan into public memory, and shape perception in ways previously unimaginable. The marriage of sport and marketing was nascent, experimental, but the potential was clear. Through the 1970s and 1980s, advertisers began to understand the power of emotion, nostalgia, and storytelling. Campaigns moved beyond information to inspiration, beyond selling a product to selling an experience, a mood, a cultural moment. Apple's 1984 ad, Coca-Cola's Mean Joe Greene, and the Budweiser Clydesdales are not remembered as pitches for consumption alone. They are remembered as shared emotional experiences, as stories that captured imagination, provoked discussion, and lingered in memory long after the final whistle. The game provided the stage, but the ads commanded attention, offering narratives as compelling as the athletic feats they accompanied. This evolution reveals a dual legacy. On one side lies innovation. The Super Bowl became a laboratory for advertising creativity, cinematic ambition, and emotional engineering. Directors, writers, musicians, and marketers pushed the boundaries of what 30 seconds could achieve, blending humor, drama, spectacle, and sentiment into highly precise experiences. The event catalyzed technological experimentation, the integration of data and digital platforms, and the development of real-time engagement strategies. Each ad became an achievement in cultural engineering, a testament to human creativity and ingenuity applied to persuasion. Yet alongside innovation exists illusion. As attention shifted from the field to the screen, from the game to the commercial, the line between genuine achievement and manufactured emotion blurred. The Super Bowl became a contest of cultural attention, a competition to see who could capture, manipulate, and retain the gaze of millions. Audiences celebrated not only the feats of players, but the artistry of campaigns designed to evoke laughter, empathy, nostalgia, or awe. The thrill of competition was increasingly intertwined with the thrill of spectacle. Memory became selective. Fans might remember the polar bears or the robots more vividly than a decisive touchdown or a game-winning interception. The ad became the lens through which the game itself was contextualized, often overshadowing the very contest it was meant to interrupt. This duality, innovation and illusion, is central to understanding the cultural impact of the Super Bowl. It reflects broader societal dynamics, the interplay between desire, attention, and narrative construction. The event exposes how audiences are drawn to emotional resonance. Two stories that speak to identity, aspiration, and memory. It reveals that human attention is a finite resource, one that can be captured and directed by carefully crafted narrative and sensory input. The Super Bowl commercial is a demonstration of cultural influence, showing how emotion, storytelling, and spectacle can shape perception and memory with precision that rivals the athletic drama on the field. Economically, the stakes have grown as dramatically as the spectacle. 30-second spots cost millions of dollars, with production budgets often matching or exceeding airtime costs. Global streaming, social media amplification, and real-time engagement strategies further increase both the scope and scale of campaigns. The Super Bowl has become an engine for commerce, generating revenue not only for networks and advertisers, but also influencing the valuation of brands, the careers of directors and actors, and the expectations of audiences. Every frame, sound, and narrative beat is carefully engineered, a reflection of both technological mastery and cultural calculation. Yet, despite the sophistication, the fundamental human experience remains the same. The commercials, however elaborate or technologically advanced, succeed because they resonate emotionally. They leverage humor, surprise, nostalgia, and aspiration to capture attention. They craft stories that audiences internalize, remember, and share. This is not merely a function of technology, but of understanding human psychology, of identifying what makes people laugh, cry, or reflect. The Super Bowl demonstrates that emotion is currency, that memory is influence, and that narrative is power. In this context, one must ask, is the Super Bowl still about football, or is it about who can sell the dream best? The question is both rhetorical and reflective, highlighting the tension between sport and spectacle. The game itself is still central. Championships are won, records are set, and athletes achieve feats of physical and strategic brilliance. Yet the cultural conversation frequently turns to the commercials, the spectacle, and the stories constructed around them. The event has expanded beyond athletic performance into a broader cultural canvas where commerce, creativity, and emotional engineering coexist, sometimes harmoniously, sometimes in tension. There is a haunting quality to this transformation. Memories once anchored in athletic triumph now intermingle with commercial storytelling. Audiences recall slogans, iconic performances, and cinematic narratives with the same intensity as game-defining plays. The Super Bowl has become a mirror, reflecting both the aspirations and vulnerabilities of viewers, showing how attention can be shaped, memory can be guided, and emotion can be engineered. The spectacle is both exhilarating and disorienting, revealing the power of narrative to dominate collective consciousness.